Chapter 109. Although this Trunks was famed for being difficult to deal with, his reputation was quite good. After receiving his guarantee and making him swear an oath, Han Shuo didn't make things difficult for him anymore. The heavily injured Trunks didn't pay any more attention to Han Shuo. He struggled to take out some gauze and medicine from his space ring and smeared it on his wounds with trembling hands. He grimaced in pain as he bandaged his wounds. "Your injuries seem to be quite serious. How long will it take for you to recover?" Han Shuo frowned when he saw Trunks' appearance. Snorting exasperatedly, Trunks said, "You're the one who caused my injuries, and you have the nerve to say that. But don't worry, although my injuries look serious right now, they'll recover easily as long as they don't injure my muscles or bones. Not to mention that the medicine I just smeared was ground from the wondrous herbs I gathered in the dark forest. It's very effective in healing scabs. I won't be a burden to you when my fighting aura recovers." Nodding, Han Shuo said, "That's good. Let's go back now." "Wait," Trunks called out, and then focused his gaze on Han Shuo's face. He asked with extreme puzzlement, "Can you tell me why you were able to discover me as soon as I came to your tent, and why you were able to detect me no matter where I hid? Also, my dragon binding slash can first use fighting aura to immobilize the enemy. As long as their strength isn't higher than mine, they can only be slaughtered by me. Why would your weapon automatically fly up and protect your entire body?" "I'm sorry, I can't tell you these two things. The only thing I can say is that don't try to ambush me in the future. That will only make you suffer." Han Shuo shrugged and said to Trunks. Trunks hadn't thought that Han Shuo would reveal his secrets. In fact, he'd only needed Han Shuo's confirmation when he'd asked Trunks. As long as Han Shuo didn't deny the truth of the two matters, this meant that there was indeed something miraculous hidden on Han Shuo's body. This was what Trunks needed to know. Nodding to express his understanding, Trunks said, "If no one can ambush you, your strength will increase by at least several times in the dark forest. It looks like there's a chance of success in finding the fruit of Dagmar this time." The journey back took 5 times longer than when they'd come. Trunks' speed was greatly reduced due to his injuries. However, Trunks stubbornly refused Han Shuo's support and stubbornly insisted on walking alone. As the two walked, Han Shuo learned many things about the dark forest through Trunks. They walked from dawn all the way until the afternoon before finally returning to their starting point. Odysseus and his group's tents were still there. They hadn't left and waited for Han Shuo and Trunks to appear. The adventurers all gripped their weapons tightly and pointed them at Trunks as if they were facing a great enemy. Only now did he suddenly open his mouth to say, "It looks like everyone doesn't welcome me, but I have a way to cure Odysseus' injuries. Is there anyone willing to trust me?" Han Shuo didn't wait for the others to say anything after he'd said these words when he immediately said, "You can help Odysseus?" Nodding, Trunks said with certainty, "Odysseus' injuries were caused by the manticore. The manticore is my companion, so I naturally know how to treat injuries caused by it. Follow me." Han Shuo had long since sensed Odysseus breathing and immediately didn't waste words as he led Trunks to open one of the tents, revealing Odysseus, who was also pale-faced and a bit weak. There was a large hole in the soft armor on Odysseus' chest that had been wrapped up with gauze. It was impossible to see the extent of the injuries inside. Aphrodite and Gordon also walked in after Trunks and Han Shuo walked in. The others surrounded the outside of the tent, carefully preventing Trunks from making any rash movements. "Take off the gauze," Trunks ordered after walking in. The group hadn't said anything since Trunks had said he had a way to help Odysseus, as if they were waiting to see Trunks' actions before deciding what to do next. Gordon was still silent, but he walked towards Odysseus. He first woke Odysseus up and then helped him take off the gauze amidst Odysseus' astonished cries, revealing the frightening wound on his chest that was so deep that bone could be seen. "Han, what's going on?" Odysseus looked weakly at Han Shuo and asked in confusion, "Don't move and don't speak. I'll explain when your injuries have stabilized." Han Shuo moved closer to Odysseus and said softly. At this moment, Trunks took out a medicine bottle from his space ring and poured out some red powder from within, slowly applying it to the wound on Odysseus' chest. He opened his mouth to explain faintly, "The tail of a manticore contains a great poison that numbs and stiffens the body. Its claws also contain this poison, but it's not as strong as the tail. The powder I've applied to him can remove the poison from the manticore's claws and speed up the formation of scabs. His chest has suffered such a heavy injury. Even if he completely recovers, it'll affect his strength in the future. Gordon's expression eased a bit, but he still appeared a bit unfriendly as he stared at Trunks. If he still wants to obtain the fruit of Dagmar, he'll definitely run into the Medusa in the swamp. The blood of the level 1 magical creature Medusa has a miraculous effect on wounds. As long as we kill the Medusa and smear its blood on his wounds, I guarantee that there won't be any side effects. The wound on his chest will heal even faster in the future. Trunks faintly explained after flicking a glance at Gordon. Looking at Gordon and then at Aphrodite, Han Shua said calmly, "I think we need him to find the Medusa for us. What do you think?" Aphrodite and Gordon looked at each other and nodded at the same time. Chapter 110. Two swordsmen made a simple stretcher to carry Odysseus. After understanding what had happened, Odysseus tried to dispel everyone's hostility towards Trunks. It was a pity that although everyone didn't continue to call for Trunks to be killed, no one gave him a friendly look either. Trunks himself was quite open to everyone's hostility. Han Shua even felt that he didn't care at all. Han Shua asked Trunks in surprise, but Trunks only responded very coldly, "If you hadn't miraculously discovered my tracks, none of them would have left alive. I've never paid attention to people who pose no threat to me." Han Shua had understood some of the rules of the Dark Forest from Trunks in the days he'd spent with Trunks. In the depths of the Dark Forest, everything depended on one's strength. Everything else was secondary. Indecisiveness and kindness were signs of weakness and would often cost one their life. Everyone followed Trunks' directions and continued to explore deeper into the Dark Forest for 3 days in a row. Odysseus' injuries had been brought under control after these 3 days. His wounds had started to slowly scab over, but his movements were still a bit impeded. Trunks' physical injuries also quickly recovered after being treated. However, because of Han Shua's Demon's Lair Edge's stabs, his hands and feet still appeared to be a bit sluggish. However, his originally pale face once again revealed rosy color. Everyone arrived at the edge of a pond at noon. They first found a large tree to put Odysseus down, and then planned on fetching some water from the pond to drink. However, before everyone could move, Trunks, who'd been with Han Shua, suddenly frowned and said to Han Shua, "Tell them to be careful. Look at the seaweed growing in the pond. These seaweed roots have sharp thorns. They'll pull people into the pond if they detect them approaching. If they're not careful, they'll lose their lives." Han Shua hastily called out when he heard this, "Gordon, you guys stand there and don't move. If you hold a torch in your hands, the scorching heat will make the seaweed hesitate." Trunks faintly suggested a solution when he saw Han Shua staring at him. "Thank you," Han Shua said softly before walking towards Gordon and the others. He explained the dangers of the seaweed and reminded them to carry the torches. When they started to act according to Han Shua's instructions, an original demon standing guard in the distance suddenly discovered the manticore's movements. Han Shua was startled and quickly arrived in front of Trunks, saying, "Your manticore is nearby?" Nodding, Trunks looked at Han Shua in astonishment and said, "You can actually detect movement in your surroundings. Not bad. I chose this path because this is where I told the manticore to stay. I have a scent on me that only it can smell. I think it'll be able to find me very quickly. So that's how it is. I hope you can make the manticore behave." Han Shou understood that Trunks' reputation for keeping his promises had always been pretty good, so he wasn't afraid of any tricks from him. However, as a level 1 magical creature with boundless strength, the manticore could identify enemies. If it attacked him and Odysseus as soon as it appeared, then it would be a bit troublesome. "I know what to do. I don't need you to remind me." Trunks leaned lazily against the large tree and suddenly opened his mouth to howl. The manticore, which had been pacing in the distance, swiftly approached Trunks when it heard his howl and stood docilely in front of him after 10 seconds. Gordon and the others, who had been drawing water from the pool in the distance, acted as if they were facing a great enemy when they saw the manticore appear, but were comforted by Han Shua's words. At this moment, one of the original demons, who had been observing the manticore from afar, suddenly saw a strange phenomenon. The branches of a small, lush green tree suddenly began to twist strangely. The twisted branches twisted into a few balls like fried dough twists and suddenly strangely transformed into human hands and feet. Han Shuo sensed the abnormality through the original demon and immediately began to observe with rapt attention. The twisting branches continued to twist and finally formed a strange person draped in tree bark clothing. This strange person had green hair and looked a bit similar to a forest troll, but had pointy ears and looked a bit like an elf. Just as Han Shuo was puzzled, the strange person identified the direction and headed in the direction that the manticore had just walked, murmuring lowly, "If the manticore is here, then Trunks must be nearby as well." Han Shuo was startled and abruptly stared at Trunks. There's a strange person who seems to have set his eyes on the manticore. He was just a tree and is now following the path that the manticore has taken and is approaching. He seems to recognize you. Trunks' lazy expression was swept away as soon as Han Shuo's words had sounded. He stood up with a bang and leapt onto the manticore's back, saying, "If I'm not wrong, that person should be the great druid Caspian." As a great druid, Caspian has the ability to transform into a tree or a giant bear. He can also communicate with trees. I can't meet him with my current strength. We have to leave immediately. It's too late. He's already here. Han Shuo frowned and suddenly spoke. Originally, Han Shuo had wanted to ask Trunks before deciding whether to leave or stand their ground, but he hadn't thought that the great druid Caspian would move so quickly. Caspian leapt onto a tree branch just as Trunks was speaking. The soft branch seemed to have a mind of its own as it suddenly swung and tossed Caspian over. Caspian had already landed in front of Trunks as soon as Han Shuo had finished speaking. He looked at Trunks with a slight smile. "Long time no see, good friend. Shouldn't you return what you owe me?" Trunks, who was riding on the manticore, didn't pay any attention to Caspian. The manticore took a leap and attempted to leave the area. The smile on Caspian's face didn't change as he suddenly recited a string of ancient and desolate incantations. All of the shrubs, trees, and flowers in the direction that the manticore had jumped seemed to come to life, turning into countless hands of all sizes as they moved to entangle the manticore and Trunks. Right in front of Trunks, the branches of a large tree intertwined into a net, blocking off his path. The shrubs churned like the waves of the sea, surrounding the manticore and Trunks in a short while. The rampaging manticore tried to destroy everything around it, but was stopped by Trunks. "Old friend, I can feel that you're injured. You didn't resist this time, which means that you don't have the confidence to throw me off. It looks like your injuries aren't light. Give me the Divine Wood Scepter, and I can help you treat your injuries. Isn't that good?" Caspian looked at Trunks, who had stopped in the distance, and spoke with a smile. Han Shuo and the others watched the dispute between Trunks and Caspian, but didn't interfere. It looked like Trunks had taken something from Caspian, and Caspian was just coming over to take it back. Judging from the current situation, it looked like Trunks was the one in the wrong. Therefore, Han Shuo didn't interfere and only watched coldly from the sidelines. "I'm injured. You won't forcefully take it at this time, will you?" Trunks spread out his hands after he'd been surrounded by the shrubs. Caspian was silent for a moment and then stared at Trunks. "If I remember correctly, you were the one who took the Divine Wood Scepter when I was injured. If there's a need, I don't mind learning from you." "All right, this is your Divine Wood Scepter. I've studied it for 3 months and haven't discovered anything special about it. I'll give it back to you." Pursing his lips and smiling wryly, Trunks took out an exquisite scepter that seemed to be made from the roots of an old tree from his space ring and tossed it far away to Caspian. A large tree branch suddenly extended down and miraculously wrapped around the Divine Wood Scepter, sending it into the hands of the great druid Caspian. When Caspian grasped the Divine Wood Scepter, an aura of vitality immediately emanated from within. The surrounding shrubs rustled as if they were cheering softly. Caspian tossed a small bottle, the size of a thumb, to Trunks. When Trunks caught it, Caspian said faintly, "The 100 Flowers essence in the bottle will be greatly beneficial to your injuries. Don't have any ideas about me in the future." Trunks gulped down the 100 Flowers essence and shrugged his shoulders at Caspian, not agreeing to anything. Judging from his appearance, He seemed to have ulterior motives towards what was on Caspian's body. "Honored Great Druid, could you please treat my friend?" The elven archer Nia suddenly walked in front of Caspian at this moment and spoke with great sincerity. Caspian smiled as he looked at Nia and nodded, saying amiably, "Adorable child, I cannot refuse your request." Druids and elves were both worshippers of the goddess of nature. Only the most devout worshippers of the goddess of nature had the right to become a druid. This druid had pointy ears and was obviously a druid that had been converted from an elf. No wonder he'd agreed without hesitation when he heard Nia's request. The great druid Caspian walked in front of Odysseus on the stretcher and glanced at Odysseus' wounds. He couldn't help but frown. Caspian then chanted an incantation and dripped 3 drops of green liquid into the wound on Odysseus' chest. He then said apologetically to Nia, "Your friend's injuries are very serious. My nature's blessing and 3 drops of vitality water will speed up the recovery of his wounds, and he won't have to worry about infection. However, he can't do any strenuous exercise after his injuries have healed. Otherwise, he may develop dizziness or even directly faint. I can't do anything about this. I'm truly sorry." "Many thanks to your benevolence, Caspian." Nia expressed her thanks and then said, "Trunks says that the Medusa's blood can help Odysseus recover completely. We'll find the Medusa." Caspian looked at Trunks with surprise and then said to Nia, "He's right. There's some magical blue blood in the area where the magical core is in the Medusa's brain. This blood can indeed help him recover completely. However, this old friend of mine isn't someone who loves to help others. Why would he tell you this? You've taken the divine wood scepter and healed him. I think you've chased me for a few months. Shouldn't you report back to the Druidic Order as soon as possible?" Trunks glared at Caspian and said with a bit of displeasure. Nodding with a smile, Caspian explained to Nia, "It looks like this old friend of mine is angry. Heh, he's actually not as bad as you think. If he's willing to help you, you have a great chance of obtaining the Medusa's blood. I'm very sorry that I have other matters to attend to and can't accompany you." "You're too kind." Nia was obviously a bit overwhelmed by the favor and hurriedly said sincerely. Caspian looked at Trunks from afar and left with a slight smile, disappearing from everyone's line of sight after a while. "Come, let's continue on our way. We'll be there in 2 more days." Trunks snorted slightly with a cold face after Caspian left and then urged everyone to continue on their way. The group didn't encounter any danger under Caspian's lead and arrived at a swamp with a heavy stench after 2 days. A few enormous man-eating flowers repeatedly attacked Han Shuo and the others in the surroundings of the swamp. It was a good thing that Trunks had warned them beforehand, and everyone had gathered together to defend against the attacks of the man-eating flowers. It's said that the fruit of Dagmar that you need grows in a piece of sludge in the middle of this enormous swamp, including a Medusa hiding within. We've arrived at our destination. Trunks pointed at the expansive swamp in front of them and said, Chapter 111. The swamp in front of them was wide, and the white bones of some humans and beasts could be faintly seen in the gray mud. It looked like there had been quite a few humans and beasts that had died here. There were also all sorts of ugly and strange plants growing in the mud. These plants had sharp thorns on their branches and swayed aimlessly in all directions, making one's heart tremble. The surrounding large trees were at the corners of the mud, and some of the branches and leaves above had fallen into the mud, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. It was as if there was a demon hidden at the bottom of the mud that had devoured them. Waves of foul odor assaulted their noses from the mud, causing water mage Aphrodite and female elf Nia to frown and cover their mouths, looking a bit unbearable. When everyone's gazes landed on the swamp, Trunks continued to explain, "The plants that grow in there are all extremely dangerous. The swamp will swallow up all humans and beasts that enter. The foul odor in the depths also contains a slow poison that can make one feel weak all over. The Medusa that hides in the swamp can roam freely in there and is very difficult to deal with." Han Shua's gaze was grave as he looked at the large swamp. He couldn't help but furrow his brow after listening to Trunks' explanation as he inwardly considered his plans. "We don't have the ability to fly, so we'll be stuck in the swamp and unable to come out if we land. According to what you've said, The Medusa lives in the swamps and can completely conceal itself within the swamps. It can attack and defend as it pleases. It's simply too difficult for us to make a move against it within the swamps. Han Shuo mused for a moment and spoke in a low voice. Flicking a glance at Han Shuo, Trunks said, "The Medusa's strength can greatly increase in the swamp. Even the Manticore, which is also a level 1 magical creature, is powerless against it. We can't fly, and thus can't do much damage to the Medusa. However, if the Medusa walks out of the swamp, we can defeat it with our combined strength. But according to my understanding of the Medusa, it absolutely won't leave the swamp easily." "Is there anything that attracts the Medusa?" Han Shuo asked. Shaking his head, Trunks said, "I don't know. The Medusa can emit beautiful sounds that have the power to tempt men and beasts. As soon as humans or beasts approach the swamp, it will suddenly attack and drag its prey into the swamp. Therefore, the Medusa doesn't have to worry about running out of food. I don't know what else it needs apart from that." After a moment of silence, Han Shuo suddenly smiled and said, "Since that's the case, we can only use the stupidest method. We'll stand guard here and make a move to kill the Medusa as soon as it makes a sound to lure prey. I think that when the Medusa discovers that there's no prey nearby, it'll be unable to resist its hunger and leave the swamp to hunt. When that time comes, we'll make a move together and be sure to kill it. Yes, although this method is very stupid, this is the only way. If the Medusa leaves the swamp, I and the Manticore have no need to fear it. If you guys are added to the mix, I think it'll be hard for it to escape death. Alright, let's make some arrangements." Traps and simple fences were placed at the edges of the swamp. Only when they actually got to work did everyone realize just how vast this project was. This swamp was exceedingly vast, and it was quite difficult to completely defend all 4 sides. The group spent a day and a half before exhaustedly completing everything. After a night's rest, everyone's ears were plugged the next day, and they stood guard in all directions according to their positions. The swamp was too vast, and even if 8 people and 1 Manticore split up, it still wasn't quite enough. Han Shuo's 3 original demons had all been released at this time and roamed around the entire swamp, constantly paying attention to the current situation. On the first day, everyone waited with rapt attention for a long time, but still didn't discover the Medusa hunting. According to Trunks, a single hunt from the Medusa was enough for it to eat for 10 days. The group had no way of predicting when it had last hunted, so they could only use this method to wait. The Medusa also didn't hunt on the second day. It wasn't until the evening of the third day that Han Shuo's original demons discovered a bulge of mud in the center of the swamp, revealing the Medusa's appearance. True to its name, the Medusa's long hair was made up of living, strange snakes. These strange snakes were incomparably long and extended in all directions of the swamp like tentacles. The Medusa's appearance was actually that of a beautiful woman. Her black eyebrows and cherry lips made her appear very beautiful, but when she opened her mouth, one would discover that her fangs were everywhere. The lower half of her body that was slightly revealed was that of a snake, and her thick skin revealed an ugly dark brown color. It was an indescribably strange sight when compared to her beautiful face. Opening her large mouth full of fangs, the Medusa emitted a beautiful, mournful, and alluring sound. Han Shuo and the others, who had long since plugged their ears, could still faintly hear the faint sound. They all felt their hearts tremble, as if they'd been inexplicably attracted by it and had the desire to find out what it was. It was a good thing that they'd only heard a bit of the sound. Adding to that Trunks' repeated reminders, they controlled themselves and didn't walk towards the swamp. They firmly remained where they'd been stationed, their gazes constantly scanning the surroundings and paying attention to the movements around them. Slowly, all sorts of small magical creatures that had been tempted by the sound began to make their way towards the swamp. They couldn't help but rush towards the swamp with joyful footsteps. There were also a few large magical creatures approaching from the distance. Han Shuo and Trunks looked at each other and temporarily didn't use the traps that they'd prepared. These magical creatures that had just appeared weren't powerful enough and didn't need to be dealt with by traps. Everyone split up and carefully passed through the obstacles of the traps. They attacked mercilessly and started killing the small magical creatures that were slowly approaching. Trunks' injuries looked like he'd recovered quite well. His efficiency was the fastest amongst the group. His figure was another dangerous magical creature as he weaved through the bushes and brought up waves of blood. He'd cleaned up all the magical creatures that had tried to approach after a while. With the help of the Demon's Lair Edge, although Han Shuo was a bit slower than Trunks, he was much faster than Aphrodite and the others. The Demon's Lair Edge was like a magical weapon that harvested lives. It spun according to Han Shuo's will and easily killed off the magical creatures that were only level 5 or 6. After cleaning up the low-level magical creatures in their area, Han Shuo and Trunks split up to help the others deal with the small magical creatures that were quickly approaching. After a while, the 20 or so small magical creatures that were approaching were all killed off by the group. These small low-level magical creatures were too worthless and Han Shuo didn't even make a move to collect the spoils. During this short period of idleness, Han Shuo grabbed the soft cloth covering his ears and stood in place with a solemn expression. This startled Trunks beside him, and he repeatedly gestured at Han Shuo. The beautiful, mournful cries were like the whispers of a lover beside one's ear, making one want to come to her gentle home and linger with her, telling her of the hardships of lovesickness. This kind of strange allure filled Han Shuo's mind in that instant and immediately caused Han Shuo to hallucinate, as if Fanny was calling out to him from the swamp behind him. He couldn't help but lift his feet and walk towards the swamp behind him. However, he'd only taken a few steps when Han Shuo's mind came to a realization. His unyielding willpower immediately caused Han Shuo to forcibly halt his steps and use his tenacious willpower to resist the assault of the allure. His body was like a boulder as he remained where he was. After such a long period of magical training, Han Shuo had ample confidence in his willpower. The allure of the Medusa's voice couldn't be resisted through magic or fighting aura. The only thing that could contend against it was his tenacious willpower. It was precisely because Han Shuo felt that he could withstand it now that he'd resolutely given up on covering his ears with the soft cloth and tried to see if the Medusa's allure could shake his unyielding willpower. The final result proved that Han Shuo's long period of magical training had indeed tempered his inhumanly strong willpower. Call after call filled with allure fell into Han Shuo's ears. The strong allure at the beginning slowly lost its effect until Han Shuo was no longer affected. He'd just taken a few steps back when he once again took a determined step forward. His expression was relaxed and natural, obviously no longer affected by the allure of the magical voice. In the distance, Trunks watched in amazement as Han Shuo's initial difficult resistance turned to the ease with which he'd handled the situation. He couldn't help but raise his thumb in admiration at Han Shuo's tenacious willpower. 5 or 6 level 3 and 4 magical creatures once again appeared in everyone's line of sight, as well as 2 frost eagles circling in the air. Han Shuo, Trunks, and the others looked at each other and were immediately startled. All of their attention was focused on the frost eagles flying low in the air. These frost eagles had obviously been affected by the Medusa's voice and looked like they were planning on resting in the swamp. Otherwise, they wouldn't have flown so low. Han Shuo grasped the powerful crossbow in his hand and took aim at the extended throat of one of the frost eagles. An accurate arrow whistled through the air. At the same time, Nia and the 2 mages made their moves at the same time, targeting the other frost eagle. This frost eagle wasn't small. Once it landed in the swamp, the Medusa wouldn't be able to come out for at least 5 or 6 days. Then, all of their previous preparations would be for naught. Therefore, the group absolutely couldn't allow the frost eagle to land in the swamp. The confused frost eagle was obviously less vigilant than before. Han Shuo's crossbow arrow stabbed into the Han Shuo eagle's neck and shot it down from the air. On the other side, the attacks of Nia and the 2 mages seemed a bit weak due to the distance. A few of Nia's arrows stuck into the frost eagle's body, but didn't seem to cause much damage. Han Shuo was a bit anxious when he saw the wounded frost eagle fly over the group's heads and land in the swamp. The crossbow needed to be reloaded and readied before it could be used. There was no way they could make it in time. Just as Han Shuo was about to bring out the Demon's Lair Edge, Trunks suddenly flung out a short sword. The short sword was imbued with Trunks' fighting aura and sank into the Frost Eagle's tailbone. The speed of the Frost Eagle's flapping wings was obviously greatly affected after being hit by the short sword, and it gradually fell downwards. The manticore in the distance then dashed out like lightning and suddenly appeared in front of the Frost Eagle. With a swipe of its powerful claws, the Frost Eagle's neck had already been torn apart. The magical creatures on the ground had all been wiped out by the traps and the three swordsmen. Everyone had just breathed a sigh of relief when a female elf suddenly appeared in the distance. Her features were pure and beautiful, and she wore a gorgeous dress. She walked quickly towards Han Shuo with a blank expression. Startled, Han Shuo immediately rushed out and blocked the female elf's advance. He opened his mouth and said, "Stop! Stop right now!" It was a pity that the female elf had temporarily lost her reason after being bewitched by the Medusa. She turned a deaf ear to Han Shuo's words of advice and walked straight towards the swamp. Not everyone has the same willpower as you. Stop trying to persuade her. Hurry up and hug her. Trunks finally couldn't help but yell out when he saw the female elf approach the swamp step by step and Han Shuo continue to persuade her. Han Shuo started as he watched the female elf approach the swamp step by step. He finally reached out with lightning speed and grabbed the female elf in his arms, ignoring her resistance as he carried her out. "Brother, brother," the female elf continuously called out as she struggled in Han Shuo's arms. When she discovered that she couldn't break free, her little fists suddenly hammered Han Shuo's chest as she mournfully called out the word brother. This level of attack didn't seem to hurt or itch Han Shuo's chest. Han Shuo's body slowly moved away from the swamp as he tightly held the female elf. The Medusa's beautiful cries became more and more urgent, but there were no longer any movements of humans or beasts in the surroundings. After a while, the Medusa finally stopped its alluring calls when it saw that it had no effect. Its body that had been hidden in the swamp all this time gradually revealed itself. Chapter 112. When the Medusa's body slowly emerged from the swamp, Han Shuo finally discovered that the Medusa was even larger than he'd imagined. The Medusa's head was filled with little snakes that continuously extended and danced. Its snake-like lower limbs were as thick as water buckets, and its body was 5 or 6 meters long when fully extended. Everyone pay attention. I think the Medusa is planning on leaving the swamp to hunt. Through the observation of the original demons, Han Shuo clearly saw the Medusa's movements and immediately warned everyone. Bad guy, big bad guy. After Han Shuo's startled cry sounded, a shriek sounded from within his arms. The pure and beautiful female elf suddenly became violent and had a panicked expression on her face. Her little fists continuously pounded on Han Shuo's chest. When he saw that the female elf had returned to normal, Han Shuo immediately let go of her, and the demon's lair edge abruptly appeared in his hand. His eyes calmly scanned the surroundings, planning on finding a suitable place to deal with the Medusa. What are you doing?" The female elf was greatly startled and thought that Han Shuo wanted to silence her. She frantically retreated 2 steps, and a magic staff suddenly appeared in her hand. She chanted an incantation, and a sharp wind blade shot towards Han Shuo's head. "Damn it! Why are you attacking me?" Han Shuo immediately glared angrily at the elf after dodging the attack. However, it looked like this female elf was even angrier than Han Shuo. She looked at Han Shuo with great enmity and snorted angrily, "What did you do to me just now?" The hungry Medusa was obviously growing impatient when it saw that no prey had entered the swamp. Its enormous body quickly moved through the swamp and started approaching Han Shuo's group. Han Shuo didn't have the time to tangle with this female elf at this moment. When he saw the female elf archer Nia walk over, Han Shuo abruptly beckoned her over and pointed at the female elf who didn't understand the situation. Han Shuo said, "You explain to her." Han Shuo immediately left after he'd spoken and arrived next to Trunks, Aphrodite, and the others. He said urgently, "It looks like the Medusa can't endure its hunger and is trying to leave the swamp in search of prey. It's coming in this direction. Everyone pay attention. You 2 mages leave quickly and stay on the large tree behind the trap. You 2 swordsmen split up and don't let the Medusa discover your tracks." Han, you and I will leave temporarily and we'll block off its path of retreat when the Medusa appears. The Medusa is very difficult to deal with in the swamp, but if it leaves the swamp, it may not be a match for my Manticore in a one-on-one fight. Therefore, we have a great chance of killing it. The only thing we need to pay attention to is to not let it discover our tracks. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult for us to deal with it once it returns to the swamp. Trunks suddenly called out loudly at this moment and quickly commanded everyone to get into position. At such a critical moment, even the other adventurers who had originally harbored enmity towards Trunks didn't continue to say anything for the sake of the Medusa. They all nodded and began to move according to Trunks' instructions. Han Shuo nodded towards Trunks and suddenly retreated, making a detour and leaving the path that the Medusa would definitely take. Through the observations of the original demons, Han Shuo's grasp of the overall situation was far greater than the others. The Medusa appeared to be quite cautious and didn't immediately leave the swamp after carefully coming ashore. Instead, it seemed to be thinking as it stayed by the side of the swamp. The magical creatures that had just appeared had all been stripped of their valuables, and their corpses thrown into the enormous trap that had been prepared beforehand. The Medusa's head spun a few times, and her watery eyes appeared a bit confused. She didn't seem to understand why no one had approached after hearing the sound. After a while, the Medusa finally left the swamp and walked towards the location where Aphrodite and the others were lying in ambush. Through the observations of the original demons, Han Shuo discovered that the elf, who'd been quite enraged just now, had finally calmed down after Nia's persuasion. He looked over with interest and only retreated a bit unwillingly under Nia's repeated persuasions. However, he didn't want to stay too far away from them. After leaving the swamp, the Medusa slowly advanced with a heart full of caution. Han Shuo and Trunks, who had just circled around, appeared at the edge of the swamp from another direction and completely blocked off the Medusa's path of retreat. Han Shuo and Trunks exchanged a knowing look and silently approached the Medusa from behind at the same time, ready to act at a moment's notice. Finally, after the Medusa had left the swamp for a few dozen meters, its wriggling body suddenly neared the trap. The Medusa's body was long and slender, and when its upper body sensed the existence of the trap, it relied on the strength of its lower limbs to keep its slanted body from falling into the trap. Instead, it moved step by step towards the outside of the trap as its serpentine body twisted. At this moment, water dragons and lightning suddenly appeared in the sky and crackled down towards the Medusa. Nia, who wasn't far in front, also drew her bow and fired. A few sharp arrows flew through the air, heading straight for the Medusa. Gordon and the other two swordsmen on the side joined forces and chopped down a tree trunk that had been suspended high in the air. The thick tip of the tree trunk suddenly smashed towards the Medusa with a loud boom. At this moment, the Medusa immediately realized that it had fallen into an ambush. Its lower limbs miraculously wrapped around a large tree next to it, and its body that had been about to fall into the trap suddenly leapt high into the air, landing back on flat ground with a bang. The tree trunk that had been targeting the Medusa crashed down from where its neck had been resting in the air, just as the Medusa had dodged. It crashed into the bottom of the trap with a loud boom. Aphrodite's water dragon, obviously, didn't have the killing power it should have when it crashed into the Medusa's body. The Medusa shook its head and shook its tail, and the water dragon turned into a spray of water that filled the sky and scattered. It was the lightning strike that caused the Medusa to cry out mournfully in pain. Only one of Nia's arrows had stuck into the Medusa's soft neck, but it had only sunk in a few inches and hadn't caused any fatal damage. The Medusa's body writhed violently, indicating that it hadn't been affected too much. After the first wave of attacks had landed, the Medusa quickly turned around with a shake of its body. It didn't attempt to retaliate against those who had attacked it and crawled towards the swamp. It looked like it was planning on entering the swamp before making any further plans. It was a pity that Han Shuo and Trunks had long since been prepared at this moment. Fierce milky white fighting aura and the deafening whistle of the demon's lair edge rang out, both targeting the Medusa. They suddenly appeared on the Medusa's neck and face. The Medusa had been able to easily deal with the previous attacks, but Han Shuo and Trunks' attacks finally made the Medusa feel the threat of death. These two waves of attacks were ferocious and contained a domineering killing intent that caused the high-level magical creature to burst forth with all of its energy. Its enormous body suddenly became exceedingly nimble as the snake hair that filled the sky suddenly danced. Hundreds and thousands of little snakes danced wildly in the air, turning into a sky full of tentacles that obstructed Trunks and Han Shua's attacks. Trunks' milky white fighting aura and Han Shua's Demon's Lair Edge's attacks suddenly surged into the sky full of flying snakes. Bloody mist instantly scattered through the air, and chunks of blood from the little snakes were continuously thrown into the air, landing on the ground with a thud. The two's attacks were blocked at the same time, and were completely unable to approach the Medusa's vitals. The little snakes that had been chopped into pieces on the ground wriggled in Han Shua and Trunks' direction, attempting to swallow Trunks and Han Shua's bodies. "Humph, you're courting death." Trunks snorted coldly as a long sword once again appeared in his hand. However, it wasn't the broadsword that had been chipped by the Demon's Lair Edge the first time. Trunks' entire body was wrapped in milky white light as sand and stones flew everywhere he passed. The little snakes that approached him all exploded as he swiftly rushed towards the Medusa. On the other side, a figure dashed out like lightning. The manticore that had long since been prepared rushed out and maintained the same speed as Trunks as he shot towards the Medusa. Han Shua remained where he was and didn't move. He instead closed his eyes and used all of his concentration to drive the Demon's Lair Edge. The little snakes on the Medusa's head all screeched as they turned into a bloody dance that filled the sky. The indestructible Demon's Lair Edge reaped the lives of the little snakes with its sharpness, instantly cutting off more than half of the Medusa's hair. When the other adventurers in the distance saw that the Medusa's path of retreat had been blocked and that it was now heavily injured, they all surged out from the back. Even more attacks appeared after everyone's combined forces. Trunks and the Manticore were even more ferocious as they stuck close to the Medusa. Trunks transformed into a ball of milky white light, sending the Medusa's flesh and blood flying with every twist and turn. The Manticore, which was also a high-level magical beast, flew around the Medusa on the flat ground. Its claws were as sharp as knives and left deep wounds on the Medusa's body that were so deep that bones could be seen. When all of the little snakes on the Medusa's head had been chopped off by Han Shua's Demon's Lair Edge, the Medusa's resistance suddenly became quite powerless as its twisted body gradually became still. Chapter 113. By the time everyone had surrounded the Medusa, it had already fallen to the ground and was motionless. Trunks leapt onto the Medusa's body with his sword and sliced open the Medusa's head. He took out the most precious item on the Medusa's body with a face full of joy. Trunks dug out the crystal core of a level 1 magical beast, along with the blue blood that was wrapped around the crystal core. By the time Han Shua had arrived from afar, everything had already been completed. Even the Medusa's body had been pushed into the depths of the trap. The elf in the distance walked over behind Nia and stuck her head out to look at the Medusa in the trap. She exclaimed softly, "How can this ugly fellow have such a pleasant voice? Angelica, you should hurry back. We still have other things to do." Nia frowned involuntarily when she saw the little female elf's face full of curiosity. "I'm not going back, Sister Nia. Let me stay with you guys. This place is much more fun than Grandpa's." Angelica smiled sweetly at Nia and shook her head as she spoke tenderly. When Han Shua arrived, Trunks took out the magical core and the most precious blood from the Medusa's brain. He handed them over to Han Shua and said, "I'll keep 10 drops of the Medusa's blue blood. You can distribute the rest." A translucent white bottle filled with the Medusa's blue blood was shoved into Han Shua's hands, along with the Medusa's magical core. Grasping the items that Trunks had handed over, Han Shua asked, "How many drops of blood does Odysseus need to completely recover?" "I think 5 drops of the Medusa's essence blood should be enough to help Odysseus recover. This essence blood has miraculous effects. Not only can it speed up the recovery of injuries, but it can also reattach severed limbs. If someone has a severed limb, they can regrow it as long as they have the Medusa's essence blood. It won't affect their movements in the future, so the Medusa's essence blood is extremely valuable." Trunks looked at Han Shua and solemnly explained the value of the Medusa's essence blood to Han Shuo. Nodding, Han Shuo also took out a medicine bottle and poured half of the Medusa's essence blood into it. He then handed the remaining half of the bottle along with the level 1 magical core to Aphrodite, saying, "These things are what you deserve. After this matter is over, you can split it with the others." Aphrodite looked in surprise at Han Shuo and said, "Isn't it a bit too much to give us? I feel that we only need one of the Medusa's essence blood and magical beast core. After all, the two of you put in the most effort in this operation against the Medusa. We only acted as a distraction. Take it for now, we still have other matters to attend to. If you have any doubts, why don't you wait until you see Odysseus? Odysseus previously told you to temporarily listen to me. I think you should remember that." The Medusa's magical beast core could be made into some mysterious musical instruments and could also have the effect of bewitching people's hearts. If it was sold, it would absolutely fetch a very high price. But to Han Shuo, his goal this time wasn't the Medusa, but the fruit of Dagmar that would be of great use to Han Shuo. As valuable as the items on the Medusa's body were, they didn't have any direct use to Han Shuo. Therefore, Han Shuo was quite generous in splitting the spoils from the Medusa's body. Han Shuo did this in the hopes that he'd have a greater chance of obtaining the most fruits of Dagmar after obtaining the fruit of Dagmar. This was what Han Shuo needed the most right now. The Medusa in the swamp has already been cleared out. There are only some man-eating plants and spreading poisonous gas left in the swamp. It's rumored that the fruit of Dagmar grows in those man-eating plants. We can think of a way to search for the fruit of Dagmar. Trunks looked at Han Shuo and suggested. Nodding, Han Shuo didn't say anything else and walked towards the swamp on his own. When he arrived at the edge of the swamp, Han Shuo randomly picked up a small rock from the shore and threw it towards the swamp in the distance. The rock sank into the swamp in the blink of an eye and disappeared without a trace. There wasn't a single person in this group who could fly. Only Han Shuo's 3 original demons could patrol the surroundings of the swamp. When they arrived, Han Shuo sat down cross-legged with a dark expression and focused his attention on controlling the 3 original demons. They danced around the wide swamp and attempted to search for the fruit of Dagmar. Trunks and the others rushed over and saw Han Shuo sitting down cross-legged without a word. Even his eyes were closed. They all felt that it was rather baffling. "Sister Nia, what's wrong with this bad guy?" The pure and beautiful female elf Angelica looked at Han Shuo with surprise and asked Nia in a sweet voice. Nia also didn't know what Han Shuo was doing and shook her head when she heard Angelica's question. She said oddly, "I don't know either, but Han is an amazing person. I think he must be doing some amazing things again." Trunks understood that Han Shuo was hiding some unknown secrets on his body. These secrets could even make a powerful swordmaster like him feel extremely wary of Han Shuo. When he saw Han Shuo's strange behavior this time, his heart immediately raced and he guessed that Han Shuo must be doing some amazing things again. He immediately focused all of his attention on observing Han Shuo's body, including some of the abnormalities in his surroundings, in an attempt to find the mysteries surrounding him. It was a pity that despite Trunks' extraordinary strength and extraordinary insight into fighting aura and magical power, the original demons that didn't have any fighting aura within their bodies and didn't rely on magical power to support themselves made Trunks' observation fruitless. He couldn't figure out what Han Shuo was doing at all. One of the original demons landed in the middle of the most flourishing man-eating plants. It suddenly discovered a plant that looked like a person in the shape of a human in a patch of red mud. This plant was the same as a normal person and also had arms, legs, a waist, and a cheeks. However, the area below its waist was like a root that was buried in the mud. The exposed neck had 3 heads that didn't seem to be covered in skin and flesh. The shape of these 3 heads was exactly the same as the fruit of Dagmar that everyone had described. Taking a deep breath, Han Shuo suddenly opened his eyes, which sparkled with the light of excitement. He said, "I've found it. The fruit of Dagmar is in the middle of the man-eating plants. It has the body of a person, but it has a fruit that looks like 3 heads. But the fruit of Dagmar is in the middle of the mud. How should we get there?" Aphrodite was first overjoyed when she heard this, but then couldn't help but frown as she spoke. "Yeah, none of us here are archmages. We have no way of flying to the surface of the swamp. Gordon frowned and also spoke powerlessly. Trunks looked at Han Shua, who was deep in thought and thought for a moment. Han, the swamp is filled with all kinds of poisonous vermin. There's also a slow-acting poisonous mist in the air. If we accidentally fall into the swamp, it's very unrealistic to think of leaving alive. I thought for a moment, and the only way is to use some of the towering trees on the side. If we borrow the slender branches of the trees and suddenly float out, we can fly across the center of the swamp for a short period of time. However, I can't guarantee that the floating power of those branches will be enough to send people directly to the other side. In addition, it'll only take the blink of an eye to float across the center of the swamp. I think it's impossible to get close to the fruit of Dagmar in that amount of time and obtain the fruit of Dagmar under the attacks of the man-eating plants. Han Shua continued to furrow his brow in silence after Trunks had spoken. After a while, Han Shua suddenly revealed a faint smile and stared at the female elf Angelica with a face full of smiles. He spoke amiably, like a big bad wolf asking a little white rabbit, "Beautiful and adorable elf, did you cast a wind blade spell on me just now?" Pulling the slightly panicked Angelica behind her, Nia looked a bit oddly at Han Shua like a mother hen protecting her chicks. Han, don't tell me you've taken what happened just now to heart and are planning to take revenge on Angelica. Angelica's status is noble among us elves, so I advise you not to provoke her. In addition, I won't allow you to target her. Smiling face isn't a good thing. That's what Grandpa told me. I feel quite awkward when I see his smile. He's definitely not a good thing. Angelica hid behind Nia and glared at Han Shua, pouting coquettishly. Shaking his head with a wry smile, Han Shua said to Nia, "What are you thinking? I need Angelica to help me with a little, if she's a wind mage." Nia let out a sigh of relief after hearing Han Shua's words and turned to look at Angelica in a friendly manner. She said with a smile, "He's not a bad person. You just cast a windblade spell. What level of wind mage are you?" "I'm only of the mid-level. I can't fly. Don't make me go get that fruit. I'll fall." Angelica shrieked as her two slender legs shook and her body floated into the air. She held her breath, and her delicate little face was flushed red. She seemed to have used all her strength to leap into the air twice, and then fell to the ground with a thud. She spread out her hands towards the crowd and revealed a helpless expression. Her performance just now seemed to be telling everyone that she really couldn't do it, and that she would fall like this. I just need you to cast a mid-level Grim Wind spell in a bit. Is there a need for you to put on such a show in front of us to prove your incompetence?" Han Shua didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at this odd little elf and asked in a strange tone. Abruptly sitting up from the ground, Angelica patted the dust off her body and puffed out her small chest, saying proudly, "So it's just a hurricane spell. I, Angelica, promise to help you. What do you plan on doing?" Trunks and the others all gathered curiously around Han Shua at this moment, waiting for Han Shua's response. Han Shua's face was grave as he looked deeply at Angelica and said lowly, "In a bit, as soon as I leave the tree branch, immediately cast a grim wind spell at me. Remember to cast it when I leave the branch, and you have to grasp the timing well." "Han, are you really planning on doing this? The force from the swinging branch won't be able to support you to the other side at all. Even with the help of the Grim Wind spell, it's quite unrealistic. In addition, the Grim Wind spell will only speed up your flight. You won't have a chance to retrieve the fruit of Dagmar then. I advise you to find another way." Trunks frowned as he looked at Han Shua and tried to persuade Han Shua. Shaking his head, Han Shua's expression was resolute as he said to Trunks, "No need. I wouldn't do this if I didn't have the confidence. Don't worry, I have other methods." After he finished speaking, Han Shua took out a tent from his space ring amidst everyone's astonishment. With a ferocious swipe of the demon's lair edge in his hand, the tent tore apart. Then, Han Shua pondered for a moment before taking out some tough ropes to tie up the tent. After a while, Han Shua stopped and said with a smile, "I've created a simple and crude tool. With the help of this tool and the aid of the Grim Wind, I'm confident that I'll be able to cross this swamp, and I'll be able to cross it at a slow speed." "Han, what is this strange thing? You say it can help you cross this swamp? I really can't believe it. Aphrodite looked suspiciously at the item in Han Shua's hand and said in disbelief, "This is called a glider. It can do it." Han Shua held the simple glider made from a tent and slowly climbed to the tallest and most luxuriant tree on the edge of the swamp under everyone's doubtful gazes. Have you really decided? Although Trunks didn't quite believe it, he couldn't see through the wonders of Han Shua's body, so he didn't try to persuade him. Seeing that Han Shua had climbed to the highest point and had prepared everything after holding onto a sturdy soft branch, he finally opened his mouth to ask, "I'm ready, Angelica. Are you ready?" Han Shua nodded and spoke to the beautiful female elf Angelica in the distance. Angelica nodded proudly and said with great confidence, "No problem, you can begin." Chapter 114. Grabbing onto the soft branch, Han Shua exerted force to fly out, his body drawing a semicircle in midair. When he returned to his starting point, Han Shua's two legs kicked the tree trunk fiercely, his body once again leaping out like lightning. After swaying a few times like this, Han Shua's body's range of flight grew larger and larger, and his speed also increased. The group looked at Han Shua with astonishment, their hearts in turmoil following Han Shua's swaying. Just when Han Shua felt that he'd reached the peak of his swaying speed, he suddenly called out loudly, "Angelica, prepare to cast the grim wind." Han Shua suddenly let go of the branch as soon as he'd finished speaking, and abruptly flew towards the other side of the swamp under the enormous force of inertia. At the same time, the simple and crude glider that he'd put away in his space ring had already appeared. Han Shua grasped it beneath his body, as if he'd suddenly grown a pair of wings. At the same time, Angelica confidently chanted the grim wind spell, and a fierce gust of wind blew up where Han Shua was, carrying Han Shua towards the swamp. If it wasn't for the existence of the glider, Han Shua would certainly have flown out like a bolt of lightning, and perhaps also fallen into the depths of the swamp amidst the lightning. However, with the assistance of the glider and the blowing of the grim wind spell, Han Shua magically and slowly floated towards the center of the swamp. He wasn't in a hurry in terms of speed. "Oh my gosh, he really did it!" Nia cried out in surprise, her face full of incredulity. The other observers were also quite surprised, and only Trunks maintained his calm. He said lowly with a grave expression, "The poisonous air in the center of the swamp is the heaviest, and the man-eating plants there aren't easy to deal with either. It won't be that easy to obtain the fruit in a short amount of time. I hope he can get what he wishes for." After Trunks' words, everyone seemed to suddenly remember that Han Shua's goal this time wasn't just to cross the swamp, but more importantly to obtain the fruit of Dagmar. After pouring cold water on Trunks, everyone's expressions became heavy. As he slowly approached the center of the swamp, Han Shua's attention was unprecedentedly focused. The demon's lair edge in his hand had long since been tightly gripped, but his eyes were tightly shut, relying on the original demons to pay attention to all abnormal movements in the center. Finally, the demon's lair edge flew out of Han Shua's palm with an ear-piercing whistle. When the demon's lair edge entered the swamp, the man-eating plants all extended their life-reaping branches and leaves, attempting to entangle the demon's lair edge into the swamp. However, the sharpness of the demon's lair edge didn't disappoint Han Shua. Large patches of thick branches and leaves fell into the swamp as the demon's lair edge danced in the air. In the blink of an eye, a large patch of man-eating plants around the fruit of Dagmar had been cleared. As Han Shua's glider neared, the demon's lair edge cut through everything as it pleased under Han Shua's mental control. At this moment, Han Shua, with his eyes closed, seemed to have reached some sort of tacit understanding with the demon's lair edge. It was as if Han Shua himself had suddenly become that indestructible demon's lair edge. The three original demons appeared in that area at the same time, observing all the changes in the surroundings of the fruit of Dagmar from three different directions. As Han Shua slowly approached, the man-eating plants in that area were all chopped up by the demon's lair edge. When Han Shua was a few meters away from that area, Han Shua, who'd been tightly shut all this time, suddenly opened his eyes. At the same time, he tilted his body and grabbed a noose in his hand, focusing all his attention on the fruit of Dagmar. He turned a deaf ear to the man-eating plants in the surroundings, as well as the faint poisonous mist slowly spreading out, as if these dangers didn't exist at all. Those observing from the outside were also a bit nervous by now. Angelica's breathing grew heavier and her face flushed red with excitement, seeming to find this situation exceedingly exciting. The noose suddenly flew out with a whoosh. The demon's lair edge that had just been chopping up the surrounding man-eating plants suddenly flew upside down. Under Han Shua's will, the tip of the demon's lair edge and the noose flew towards the neck of the fruit of Dagmar's human form. A foul stench suddenly filled Han Shua's surroundings. Han Shua felt a tightness in his chest in that moment, and his mind became temporarily dizzy. The demon's lair edge that had been moving towards the fruit of Dagmar suddenly fell downwards without direction following Han Shua's momentary lapse of concentration. "Careful, hang in there," Aphrodite suddenly called out from the shore, reminding Han Shua to stay focused. The magical yuan automatically circulated to his chest, and wherever the magical yuan passed, the tightness in Han Shua's chest disappeared bit by bit. His slightly dizzy mind once again returned to normal. With a thought, the demon's lair edge that was about to fall into the swamp suddenly whistled sharply. The sharp edge trembled and flew towards the fruit of Dagmar like lightning, bringing the noose with the tail of the demon's lair edge towards the neck of the fruit of Dagmar's human form. Delighted, Han Shua took a deep breath and pulled forcefully with his large hands, tightening the noose. Branches and leaves of the man-eating plants that had come over once again were chopped off by the demon's lair edge that had completed its mission. Some of the branches and leaves even had colorful fluids flowing out of them. The fruit of Dagmar slowly left the swamp amidst everyone's trepidation. Han Shua exerted more and more force, and with the help of the demon's lair edge, it cut off the fruit of Dagmar from the waist down. Han Shua abruptly lifted it up, and the fruit of Dagmar, along with the neck and the human form's upper limbs, flew out of the swamp. Slowly exerting force in his hand, the fruit of Dagmar gradually retracted. The glider carried Han Shua across the center of the swamp and slowly flew towards the other side. "Rob them!" A sharp cry suddenly sounded at this moment, and then 4 arrows with flames burning on them shot towards Han Shua's body. At the same time, an enormous hand suddenly formed from the mud, grabbing towards Han Shua's legs. "Oh, damn it, there's an enemy!" Trunks suddenly cursed from the shore and shouted loudly. Han Shua, who was on the glider, was only a dozen or so meters away from the opposite shore. The enormous hand formed from the mud was the greatest threat, so Han Shua had no choice but to call back the demon's lair edge to deal with it. Of the 4 burning arrows, 2 were aimed at Han Shua, and the other 2 were aimed at the glider beneath Han Shua. At this moment, Han Shua would rather be injured than let the glider ignite and fall. He took out a dagger from his space ring and fiercely brandished it to block the 4 incoming arrows. The 4 burning arrows were obviously not easy to deal with. Han Shua had no foothold on the glider and was in a rather sorry state. He finally managed to block 2 arrows with difficulty, but one still landed on Han Shua's calf, bringing scorching pain to Han Shua. Han Shua could only stop the other arrow from deviating slightly, but it still landed below the glider and set the glider ablaze. "Be careful, he's coming ashore." There were a dozen or so people standing on the swamp on the opposite shore, all of them waiting for Han Shua to come over. These people were dressed like mercenaries, but also seemed to be part of a private group. There were people of all professions mixed in. His heart was filled with boundless rage, and Han Shua wanted nothing more than to exterminate these people on the opposite shore. It looked like these people had coincidentally arrived on the opposite shore because Trunks and the others were separated by a large swamp. From the other side of the river, plus Trunks and the others were paying too much attention to Han Shua. His vigilance had dropped, and he hadn't discovered the existence of these people. In the end, these people had ambushed him. During this process, the fruit of Dagmar had finally been put away into Han Shua's space ring. It was very painful for Han Shua to have the arrow stuck in his calf, and the glider had also slowly started to burn. Han Shua's sleeves had already been scorched, causing Han Shuo to endure the heart-wrenching pain of being burned. However, with the burning Han Shuo and the glider still continued to land unimpeded on the opposite shore. However, these people were vicious enough, and some more set up their bows and arrows, attempting to shoot Han Shuo to death in midair. The Manticore's roar suddenly sounded at this moment, and then Han Shuo saw a murderous Trunks charge directly at the group with his sword in hand. Not far away, Aphrodite and the other adventurers were also enraged to the extreme as they quickly approached the opposite shore. Under the effects of the Demon's Lair Edge, the giant hand of sludge that had just been formed by the Earth Mage had already calmed down. The Demon's Lair Edge finally returned to Han Shuo's side when the whistling sounds of arrows rang out, helping Han Shuo smash the string of arrows into pieces. Enduring the heart-wrenching pain, Han Shuo's hands had been largely burned, and his hair had also been charred black. With a deep-rooted hatred, the glider finally landed on the opposite bank, which was burning fiercely. When Han Shuo had forcibly pulled out the arrow stuck in his calf, Han Shuo's expression was a bit frightening as he stood up resolutely. A pair of bone-chilling and extremely dangerous eyes shot onto the ambushers. Chapter 115. Who are you people? Trunks first breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that Han Shuo was fine, and then looked coldly at the strangers. Don't care who we are. Leave behind the Medusa's core and blood, as well as the fruit of Dagmar, and we can spare your lives. An adept mage in the front held a staff in his hand and spoke with a dark face. Leon, it can't be that simple. Hehe, look, there's 3 beautiful girls running over. We haven't touched women in a long time. These 3 girls need to stay behind and let us have some fun. Another adept swordsman with a body as sturdy as an orangutan carried a broadsword on his shoulder and smiled obscenely. Angelo, your words make a bit of sense. I didn't see these 3 girls just now. Haha, leave behind the 3 beautiful girls and everything else. Strength reigns supreme in the dark forest. If you want to live, then get the hell out of here. Adept Mage Leon also looked with great interest at Nia, Aphrodite, and Angelica running over from afar and spoke merrily. There were more than 10 people in this group. Not only were there mages and swordsmen, there were also archers, priests, and thieves. All of them were experienced men with extraordinary strength. Do you think you're worthy? Han Shuo walked over from afar at this moment. Han Shuo's body exuded an exceedingly dangerous presence without any restraint. Han Shuo's features were savage and terrifying after his body had been set aflame. These people were a bit frightened as he walked over step by step. Han, are you all right? Trunks couldn't help but ask when he saw Han Shuo's exaggerated appearance. This ugly thing is an eyesore, but his life force is quite tenacious. He hasn't died yet. Brothers, let's get rid of him first. Angelo called out with a cold face and spoke directly. Gordon, Aphrodite, and the others had finally arrived at this time. Han Shuo didn't say another word as his body suddenly flashed out at high speed, heading straight for Angelo. A faint black magical aura slowly seeped out from Han Shuo's body. Due to the unprecedented rise in killing intent and anger, Han Shuo's molded spirit realm mind had become unstable. His body instantly changed. The dark demonic aura spilled out under the influence of the demonic yuan. Han Shuo's mind instantly became muddled, and all that was left in his heart was the violent desire to kill and destroy everything. His pupils turned a frighteningly ghastly white, with no more black pupils. This kid is a bit odd. Everyone be careful. Angelo was startled by Han Shuo's demonic appearance and immediately cried out in alarm. Although Trunks and the others couldn't see Han Shuo's expression from behind, they could feel that something was wrong with Han Shuo. The wisps of black demonic aura that were overflowing from Han Shuo's body were mixed with an evil and terrifying aura. This aura made everyone instinctively feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. Let's go. Help Han Shuo kill these fellows who are taking advantage of his misfortune. Gadon roared and took the lead to rush out. When the people behind him saw that Gadon had moved, they did not hesitate at all and began to attack. Only Angelica stood there, seeming a bit at a loss as to what to do. She said to Nia, who was looking for a large tree to hide behind. "Hey, Sister Nia, do you need my help? Just protect yourself. The situation is too dangerous right now." Nia called out lightly with impatience. She had already nocked an arrow and aimed at a human archer in the distance. A shrill, soul-sucking shriek, like the despairing cry of a demon from the depths of hell, filled the entire battlefield in an instant. Everyone's minds trembled as they felt a chill on their skin. They were shocked by this strange, soul-sucking shriek as they frantically looked around, trying to find the source of the sound. "The sound's coming from that kid." Angelo was startled as the veins on his forehead bulged. He called out loudly as he looked at Han Shuo charging over. It was only after he spoke up that everyone noticed the source of the sound. It was the Demon's Lair Edge that was flying close to Han Shuo's body. At this moment, the Demon's Lair Edge's blade was emitting thick demonic aura, circling around Han Shuo's body. The black demonic aura danced around the Demon's Lair Edge like a demon that could devour everything, giving everyone an extremely evil visual impact. Kill him first." Angelo was truly panicking now. An extremely uneasy feeling rose in his heart as he suddenly started shouting. Everyone could see that something was wrong with Han Shuo. Even Trunks, who had been through the baptism of battle, felt a chill in his heart when he saw Han Shuo's current state. He couldn't figure out just what was happening to Han Shuo. These enemies were naturally even more afraid. The only solution they could think of to deal with this unknown danger was to directly destroy him. Suddenly, several fierce magical attacks flew through the air with bows and arrows between them, all shooting towards Han Shuo's head. It was likely that even Trunks wouldn't have an easy time dealing with such a fierce wave of attacks. But at this moment, Han Shuo strangely let out a low, beast-like roar. He pushed off with both feet, and his body actually soared several meters into the air, as if he was really flying through the air. He directly leaped over the onslaught of attacks and suddenly shot towards Angelo like a bolt of lightning. There were several arrows and a few magical attacks stuck in the area where Han Shuo had just used his strength and a pair of footprints that had sunk into the ground. "Damn it," Angelo frowned. He suddenly discovered that the ferocious and terrifying Han Shuo was actually charging towards him through the air. Angelo only had the adept mage Leon by his side and couldn't do anything at all. He could only unsheath his broadsword and take a stance, intending to give Han Shuo a painful blow. The Demon's Lair Edge, which had been mysteriously circling around Han Shuo all this time, suddenly flew out first with a soul-sucking howl. It shot towards Angelo like an evil spirit nibbling away at its prey. Angelo's heart chilled as he suddenly exerted force, the broadsword in his hand exploding with dark green fighting aura. The fighting aura formed the shape of a cross, striking towards the Demon's Lair Edge that was descending from the sky. The sonorous sound of metal clashing suddenly sounded from between the Demon's Lair Edge and Angelo. The Demon's Lair Edge actually miraculously swung to the side after a sharp howl, along with the cracked Demon's Lair Edge. Under Angelo's astonishment, Han Shuo's body that had fallen from the sky crashed onto Angelo's body. A mournful cry instantly emitted from Angelo's mouth. Angelo, who had been extremely proud and domineering just a moment ago, now let out a pained cry. Han Shuo, who was like an evil god possessed by a demon, straddled Angelo's body, madly attacking and tearing apart Angelo's body. Angelo's counterattack mixed with fighting aura landed on Han Shuo's body, but Han Shuo didn't react at all. He only attacked Angelo even more fiercely. A pair of slender palms seemed to have become sharp weapons, forcibly tearing apart Angelo's ears. The bridge of his nose was deeply sunk into his cheeks, and his eyes were a bloody mess. His eyeballs had already exploded into a viscous mass of blood that flowed out. The flesh on his chest was torn apart by Han Shuo's frenzied tearing. Large pieces of flesh were torn apart with fresh blood. Such a scene made one's scalp go numb. "Save me! Save me!" At this moment, Angelo's face had become flat. It was even more terrifying than Han Shuo's malevolence. Only his mouth was still able to let out a mournful cry for help. Han Shuo, who had fallen into a demonic state, only had the pleasure of killing and destruction in his heart. He no longer had the peace and patience that he usually had. He seemed a little impatient at Angelo's cries. He punched straight at Angelo's mouth. The sound of teeth breaking suddenly rang out. Angelo whimpered weakly, then spat out his broken tongue mixed with teeth. Oh my God! How did we provoke such a madman? Leon, who was not far away, saw the cruel process of Han Shua's violence. He felt a chill in his heart. His body trembled a little, and he couldn't help but scream. Punch after punch, Han Shua's fists still landed on Angelo's cheeks and neck. Angelo, who had been whimpering incessantly, now had his chest facing the sky, but his face was already facing the ground. This posture showed that his neck had obviously been broken. Angelo was long dead. What's wrong with Han? Why is he so cruel? On the other side, Aphrodite and the others, who had been preparing to attack, were all scared silly. They even forgot to continue attacking the enemies, and only stared blankly at Han Shua's violence. Angelica, stay there and don't come over. Nia saw that the curious Angelica wanted to come over and see what was going on. She suddenly yelled out and stopped Angelica from approaching. She didn't want her to see this kind of scene. Don't let them get away. Han's a bit off right now, but we should help him now. Although Trunks had also killed countless people, Han Shua's atrocities made his scalp go numb. However, Trunks was someone who had weathered through great storms and waves, and understood what he had to do at this time. After Trunks charged over with the manticore, milky white fighting aura blossomed from his longsword and immediately killed an enemy thief and archer. The milky white fighting aura represented the identity of a swordmaster, and the appearance of the manticore signified Trunks' status. It was only now that these people realized that they'd provoked Trunks from the dark forest. Leon groaned and said painfully, "Damn it, why are we so unlucky? It's one thing to run into a terrifying madman, but we've also run into this kind of infamous malefic star. Damn it, why is it Trunks? Everyone hurry and run." Another swordsman also called out with a bit of fear. There were more than 10 people in the group, and 4 of them were senior swordsmen and adept mages. Add to that the balance of the various professions. This kind of strength was actually quite tyrannical. Even with the addition of Trunks, they still wouldn't necessarily have absolute confidence in winning against them. But because of Trunks' reputation on one hand and Han Shua's exaggerated actions on the other, these people were finally shocked enough to make the decision to retreat. "You guys stay here, I'll give chase." Trunks suddenly called out when he saw that Aphrodite and the others were attempting to chase after them. Just as his voice left his mouth, before he could finish speaking, the demonized Han Shua had already leapt up from Anglo's corpse and flew out with the demon's lair edge. His speed was like a bolt of lightning as he charged towards the escaping Leon. "That demon has caught up. Leon, why did you think of provoking them? You've caused our deaths." A swordsman turned his head and complained bitterly to Leon when he saw Han Shua appear. "Everyone split up. Although I can't see through that demon's strength, it looks like he's not much weaker than Trunks if he was able to kill Anglo like this. You better hope you don't run into him, or you'll surely be tortured to death." Leon immediately changed directions after shouting. Everyone had just witnessed Han Shua's brutality and didn't need Leon's reminder at this time. All of them suddenly changed directions and gathered in 2s and 3s, fleeing in different directions. Although they'd heard of Trunks' strength, they knew that Trunks had never killed someone so cruelly before. Therefore, they would rather run into Trunks than the extremely sinister and cruel demon Han Shua, whose strength and identity were unknown. With a whoosh, Han Shua appeared in this place and didn't stop, directly charging forward. In front of a river, 2 journeyman swordsmen and a lightning adept mage were finally caught up by Han Shua. When the 3 saw that the newcomer was actually Han Shua, they all revealed expressions of fear, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. Seeing that Han Shua was rapidly approaching, the adept mage finally couldn't help but yell, "Motherf asterisk cur, fight him to the death, or we'll definitely be tortured to death by him." As soon as the lightning adept mage said so, a magic incantation came out of his mouth. 5 bolts of lightning slithered through the air like dragons and snakes, winding and entangling towards Han Shua. The 2 journeyman swordsmen held their long swords, appearing somewhat nervous due to fear. It wasn't until Han Shua arrived in front of the 3, dodging 3 bolts of lightning and being struck by 2 bolts, that the 2 swordsmen and the mage were overjoyed. The 2 swordsmen moved forward while the mage followed behind, intending to kill Han Shuo. Unfortunately, they just couldn't understand the toughness of Han Shuo's body. After being struck by 2 bolts of lightning, Han Shuo's body was even more injured, but he didn't feel any pain due to his demonization. After demonization, Han Shuo suddenly rushed into the middle of the 2 swordsmen and the mage, immediately launching a life and death struggle. After a few breaths, relying on a crazy fighting spirit, Han Shuo forcefully endured 2 waves of sword light from the 2 swordsmen and killed the lightning adept mage who had miscalculated Han Shuo's physical condition. Afterwards, he used the last of his magical yuan to severely injure a swordsman. Finally, his body completely lost all strength and collapsed weakly to the ground. He can't hold on anymore. Help me kill him quickly. The heavily injured journeyman swordsman shouted to the other person as he lay in a pool of blood. The only remaining journeyman swordsman had a gloomy face and excited eyes as he raised his sword and walked step by step towards the paralyzed Han Shuo, who no longer had any magical yuan or physical strength left in his body. Chapter 116. Hurry up and kill that madman. Another fallen swordsman abruptly yelled out harshly, "Shut your mouth." The swordsman who'd been walking towards Han Shu suddenly turned his head and glared coldly at the person behind him. He said stiffly, "If you dare speak any more nonsense, I'll kill you as well." The person suddenly froze in place when these words were spoken and looked at him with a completely unfamiliar gaze. He opened his mouth and asked in confusion, "Francis, what's wrong with you?" Francis' face was full of excitement and greed as he walked towards Han Shuo with his sword in hand. His gaze was focused on Han Shuo as he said agitatedly, "I'm going to make a fortune. You better not block my way, or I'll make you die with him." The person finally understood what was going on at this moment. Francis had been drowned in greed by now, and there were no longer any companions in his mind. All that was left was the desire to make a fortune. Han Shuo slowly awoke from his demonic state under the stabbing pain in his head. After a brief moment of confusion, Han Shuo remembered everything that had just happened and immediately realized the urgency of the situation. The spoils of war on the Medusa and the fruit of Dagmar will all be mine soon. You evil madman, go die. Francis' gaze was fixed on the space ring on Han Shuo's hand as he spoke with a darkened face and excitement. Francis raised the long sword in his hand as soon as he'd finished speaking and stabbed towards the powerless Han Shuo's chest. It looked like Francis was planning on taking Han Shuo's life first, and then taking the space ring to study its contents. Han Shuo quickly chanted a necromancy incantation, and a bone dagger suddenly appeared to block the sword in Francis's hand as it stabbed towards Han Shuo's chest. "Actually, I'm a necromancer." Han Shuo looked oddly at the shocked Francis and said coldly. In the midst of Felant's terror, the little bone knife pushed and Felant's body involuntarily retreated. Then, a little skull with a huge eye patch on one eye swiftly approached Ference with a bone knife in hand. Amidst the sounds of metal clashing, the heroic little skull beheaded the already injured Ference with his little bone knife. The other heavily injured swordsman who had been yelling to kill Han Shuo was naturally mercilessly killed by the little skull after Han Shuo gave the order. From the moment this group of people appeared, they had used despicable means to deal with him. From the beginning to the end, they had not shown any mercy. Han Shuo was not a naive person. He naturally understood that an eye for an eye was the most suitable ending for them. The little skull's appearance had saved Han Shuo, who was about to be killed, and had completely reversed the situation that should have been happening. Wielding the bone knife, the little skull skillfully arranged the corpses of the 3, collecting all the valuable items on them and giving them to Han Shuo to store in his space ring. Of the 3, only the Thunder Adept Mage had some belongings, including an expensive magic staff, a few hundred gold coins, and 2 or 3 level 3 and 4 magical creature cores. The 2 swordsmen had nothing but a poor quality sword and some scraps of gold coins. Lying limply on the ground, Han Shuo understood that his mind would immediately sink into a murderous frenzy after entering demonhood. He would never wake up until his magical yuan and stamina were completely exhausted. Not only was Han Shuo's magical yuan and stamina depleted after entering demonhood, but his body had also suffered all kinds of blows. This was the most serious injury he had ever suffered, even more serious than Odysseus' attack from the Manticore. It was a good thing that Han Shuo's physical strength was far superior to Odysseus. Therefore, even though Han Shuo was so weak that he couldn't even stand up, he was well aware of his body's condition. He would be able to recover in a short amount of time, even without the aid of any medicine. All this time, Han Shuo hadn't revealed his identity as a necromancer. This was because he was hiding some secrets that could save his life at critical moments. If it wasn't for the fact that Han Shuo still had mental strength to use when facing the ambushers this time, he would have been hard-pressed to escape death. If these people had known beforehand that Han Shuo was also a necromancer, the current outcome would likely have been different. Lines of magical incantations appeared from his mouth as several zombie warriors and skeletal warriors suddenly appeared around Han Shuo's body. They all raised their weapons and surrounded Han Shuo, planning to deal with any changes that might occur at any time. Han Shuo, who had awakened, immediately made contact with the original demons. Through the original demon's observation, Han Shuo saw that Trunks had already met up with Aphrodite and the others. They were currently searching for traces of him in this area. The physically weak Han Shuo was not only unable to move or speak loudly, but he had a large number of dark creatures at his disposal. After the order was given, the little skull made a huge ruckus in the area, sending shrubbery flying everywhere. "There's movement over there. Let's go take a look." Trunks' ears were quite sharp and immediately detected the commotion. After pointing out the direction, he led the group towards Han Shuo's location. The dark creatures that had just been summoned were immediately sent back to the other dimension by Han Shuo's mental strength. It didn't take long before the group led by Trunks finally arrived in front of Han Shuo. "How is it?" Trunks exclaimed and immediately ran towards Han Shuo with large strides. Han Shuo was in an extremely sorry state now. His entire body was scorched, and there were many places on his body that had been burned by the fire. His face was so black that it was almost impossible to make out his original appearance. It was rather difficult for Trunks to still recognize Han Shuo at a glance. "I'm fine. I didn't think that I would run into this group of people on the way." Han Shuo's voice was a bit weak as he laughed wryly and said softly, "I was careless this time. I was surprised by your novel actions and let down my guard for a moment, resulting in this situation. But it's no big deal. These things happen every day in the dark forest. I've long since grown used to everything here." Trunks breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that Han Shuo was still alive and shrugged his shoulders. Afra, Gordon, and the others came over and greeted Han Shuo one by one. Afra then said with a bit of emotion, "It looks like it's as Caspian said, Trunks is a good person. At least last time. Trunks only wanted the spoils of war from the twin-headed dragon and didn't ambush us from the start. He didn't want to kill us, and he didn't harbor any lustful thoughts. I finally understand what Caspian meant when I compare him to them. I'd thought he was joking before." Everyone thought back to their encounter with Trunks after Afra's words, and thought back to those people's actions just now. They suddenly felt that Trunks was actually quite merciful. "I'm actually not as good as you think I am, and I'm constantly changing. When I first arrived in the dark forest, I was once as simple as you all, and I also trusted the companions beside me greatly. However, after repeated actions, I've realized that I can trust no one but myself in the dark forest. Danger is everywhere, and you must harden your heart and face everything around you. Otherwise, if you show any benevolence or weakness, it's very likely that you'll lose your life." Trunks shrugged and explained dashingly, "What happened to you just now?" After hesitating for a moment, Nia looked at Han Shuo and asked with a bit of lingering fear. Everyone's gazes all focused on Han Shuo when Nia's words left her mouth, seeming to wait for Han Shuo to give a reasonable explanation. After all, Han Shuo's methods had been a bit brutal just now, and his expression was also vastly different from usual. Everyone couldn't help but have this question. Because the martial arts techniques I've trained in are a bit incomplete, I may fall into a terrifying situation that even I can't control once I'm strongly stimulated. I'm very sorry that my anger just now has caused everyone some confusion. I didn't want this to happen either, but this isn't something I can control. Han Shuo couldn't explain anything to them at all regarding the situation of him falling into a demonic trance and could only say this. So that's how it is. Your performance just now was very frightening. If you can't control this kind of martial arts technique, then it's best if you give up early, because if you continue like this, it may lead to unpredictable consequences. Afra looked sincerely at Han Shuo and advised kindly. Han Shuo naturally wouldn't take Afra's advice to heart. If the situation of him falling into a demonic trance could be effectively controlled, then it wouldn't be called falling into a demonic trance. This kind of falling into a demonic trance didn't happen so easily. This was all caused when one's realm reached a certain level due to their state of mind and other reasons. For Han Shuo, he could only be vigilant and on guard, but he wouldn't give up training in demonic magic because of this. Alright, we should first get rid of Han Shuo and meet up with Odysseus before discussing other matters. Trunks first looked strangely at Han Shuo and then opened his mouth to speak to Afra. Trunks' suggestion was unanimously agreed upon by everyone. Gordon and the other two swordsmen then made a simple stretcher and lifted Han Shuo up, walking towards Odysseus' location. Along the way, Han Shuo learned from Trunks that this group of people seemed to be the private guards of the McGrady Guild. Trunks had chased after them and killed quite a few people in a row, until he discovered that they had met up with even more guards. He sensed that the other party's strength wasn't something that he could deal with alone and returned because he was worried about Han Shuo's situation. Han Shuo had heard of the McGrady Guild before. It was a large guild that existed on the same level as the Boost Guild. Phoebe had been vexed for a while because of this guild last time. It was said that this guild specialized in smuggling and sold all kinds of contraband goods between countries. They had close relationships with the nobles of various countries. The McGrady Guild didn't belong to the Lancelot Empire, but rather belonged to the Brute Merchant Alliance established by mercenary merchants. They seemed to have quite a reputation in the Brute Merchant Alliance, and had only recently entered and exited the Lancelot Empire frequently, causing quite a bit of damage to Phoebe's Buzzed Merchant Alliance. The injuries on Han Shuo's body could be said to be too severe to look at. If such heavy injuries had landed on an ordinary person's body, in addition to the constant bumpy journey, any normal person would absolutely have cried out in pain. But after half an hour of bumpy travel, Han Shuo's wounds had been treated simply, and he hadn't let out a single cry of pain from beginning to end as he lay on the stretcher. This made everyone ineffably admire Han Shuo's astonishing endurance. Not only that, but Han Shuo actually still had the energy to converse continuously with Trunks, asking him about the McGrady Guild situation. It was as if the scalp-numbing injuries on his body weren't something he was enduring at all. When they arrived at a cave that everyone had worked together to dig and moved away the layers of rocks, Gordon finally couldn't hold it in any longer and looked at Han Shuo with an unbearable expression, voicing everyone's thoughts. Han Shuo, what kind of monster are you? Laughing involuntarily, Han Shuo, whose tolerance for pain had already reached a monstrous level, really didn't know how to respond to Gordon. He could only smile wryly and shake his head, saying, I'm just a bit more thick-skinned than you guys. When Odysseus came out, Nia recounted the course of events. Having recovered a lot, Odysseus felt his heart skip a beat as he listened. He was extremely shocked at his encounter with the group. Sister Nia, I think I should go back. My grandfather must be worried. Angelica tilted her head in thought when she saw that no one was paying attention to her. She seemed a bit bored as she spoke. Nia abruptly slapped her head when she heard Angelica's words and said with sudden realization, I almost forgot about you. Let's go. I'll immediately send you to your grandfather's. The dark forest is too dangerous. Don't sneak off next time. Nodding, Angelica smiled sweetly as she bid farewell to everyone. She waved her hand when she reached Han Shuo and said, Goodbye, bad guys. Nia, you'll be fine by yourself, right? Gordon, go with her. Odysseus creased his brow and said to Nia. Shaking her head, Nia smiled faintly. No need, Captain. Her grandfather is nearby. I'll yell out if anything happens. Nia quickly left with Angelica after saying these words, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. I think I've fulfilled my promise to you. It's time to leave now. Trunks looked at Han Shuo and opened his mouth to speak to Han Shuo. After spending some time together, Han Shuo discovered that Trunks wasn't as unbearable as the rumors said. At least, Trunks' actions during this time didn't make Han Shuo feel any discomfort. In Han Shuo's heart, he'd even unconsciously treated Trunks as a companion. He wasn't quite used to hearing that Trunks was about to leave immediately. Let's do a good deed to the end. Look at me now that I've suffered such heavy injuries. You should stay and take care of me for a while no matter what. It won't be too late for you to leave after we leave this dangerous place. Han Shuo looked at Trunks and said with a cheeky smile, "This isn't what I promised you earlier. Actually, I've fulfilled my promise from the moment I obtained the fruit. Helping you deal with the enemies later on is already an extra. Don't be too greedy. Look at me. I'm injured and Odysseus can't make a move right now. It'll be very difficult for the rest of us to walk out of this dangerous area unscathed. I don't think you'll be so cruel as to abandon us." Trunks was silent for a while after saying this and finally said, "How about this, Han? Promise me one thing and I'll protect you and send you to a relatively safe place." "What is it?" Han Shuo started and asked Trunks. "I won't say it for now. Just remember to promise me. Aren't you afraid that I'll go back on my word?" "Heh. I'm someone with no credibility." "I believe you." Trunks stared deeply into Han Shuo's eyes as he spoke word by word. Han Shuo suddenly grew silent and met Trunks' gaze. Han Shuo was still smiling cheekily, but he nodded and said, "All right, I promise you." Odysseus looked at the two with a face full of gratification. He suddenly felt that the two of them were quite similar in this moment. Both had mysterious origins, both were strong, and both had tenacious personalities. They were calm and collected in the face of trouble, and showed no mercy when they needed to act. As Odysseus stared at Han Shuo also looked at Odysseus. Han Shuo thought for a moment, and then spoke to Odysseus with a serious expression. "Your goal in coming to the dark forest this time is for the fruit of Dagmar. I know that you didn't hold much hope in the beginning and didn't seem to value the fruit of Dagmar as much as I'd imagined. As a friend, I'd like to ask you, Odysseus, do you really need the fruit of Dagmar?" "Not really. Our main goal in coming to the dark forest is to train our own strength. Of course, if we're lucky, we hope to obtain some valuable items. I think we've completely achieved our goals now. The fruit of Dagmar was just an empty goal to begin with, and we didn't really think we'd be able to obtain it. Ordinary people will go crazy if they eat this fruit, so we have no use for it. We just casually promised someone else and came here to try our luck." Odysseus explained seriously when he saw Han Shuo's grave expression. He then looked questioningly at Han Shuo and asked, "Han, why are you asking this?" Heaving a sigh of relief, Han Shuo nodded with a faint smile and said, "Because I want to take the fruit of Dagmar for myself. The martial arts technique I practice will cause my mind to become muddled, just like they said just now. But if I have the fruit of Dagmar, I can improve this situation. So if you don't really need it, I'd like to take all 3 pieces of the fruit of Dagmar, but I can compensate you with gold coins. Then you can take it all for yourself." "Heh, we've already gotten too much. You've given us all the cores of the twin-headed dragon and the Medusa. These can be exchanged for enough gold coins. If you want the fruit of Dagmar, then take it all. There's no point in bringing up gold coins." Odysseus smiled freely and spoke sincerely to Han Shuo. Aphrodite, Gordon, and the others indicated that Han Shuo absolutely didn't need the fruit of Dagmar. They all said things like they didn't really need the fruit of Dagmar anyways. "All right, since this is the case, I won't hold back." Han Shuo really did need the fruit of Dagmar for this level of molded spirit. Therefore, he didn't put on too many false pretenses and readily agreed. In the next few days, Han Shuo's original demons scouted all around and Trunks' protection allowed the group to return the way they'd come, planning on leaving the depths of the dark forest as soon as possible. In just a few days, Han Shuo, who'd been so weak that he could only be carried by the group, had actually gotten off the stretcher. A pair of slender arms and jade-white cheeks were once again revealed after a layer of old skin had retreated from his severely burned arms and cheeks. There wasn't the slightest trace of being burned. The charred skin on his body and his hair had also returned to normal in the span of a few days, miraculously causing Odysseus and the others to once again wonder, "What kind of monster are you?" His magical yuan was also rapidly recovering. Han Shuo carefully stored the fruit of Dagmar during this process and prepared to eat it when he was alone and quiet after returning to the cemetery of death. The injuries within his body also quickly healed as the magical yuan circulated. As the days passed, Han Shuo's injuries quickly healed. On this day, Han Shuo's original demons spied a large group of people walking with earth dragons in the distance. They actually discovered traces of adept mage Leon and suddenly realized that those people should be from the McGrady Guild. After calculating the days and distance, Han Shuo discovered that they were almost close to where the forest troll lived. He suddenly remembered that these infamous bandits were still waiting for their great goddess Datara's instructions. When he thought of the despicable things that the guards of the McGrady Guild had done to him, Han Shuo's lips couldn't help but blossom into a cold, vicious smile. Chapter 117. Odysseus, we met here, so let's part here as well. Han Shuo smiled faintly at Odysseus and the others at the place where he'd met Odysseus and the others. This place was close to where the forest troll lived, and Odysseus could guarantee a full recovery from his injuries after experiencing the Medusa's essence blood. Han Shuo's injuries had more or less healed after these days of recovery. It wasn't too dangerous to leave at this time, so Han Shuo brought up the suggestion of parting. All good things must come to an end, and Odysseus and the others also knew that this place was relatively safer. Odysseus nodded helplessly after Han Shuo's suggestion and said, "Since this is the case, then let's part ways here. I hope we can meet again in the future." The group bid farewell to Han Shuo and Trunks with some reluctance, and finally gradually left this place after Han Shuo and Trunks waved their hands, heading towards the outskirts of the dark forest. Trunks finally spoke up when Odysseus and the others had disappeared. "With your current condition, I don't think you need my protection anymore. It looks like it's time for me to leave." Seeing Trunks shake his head, Han Shuo smiled and said, "You can't leave yet." "Why?" "I'm quite angry at the harm the McGrady Guild has done to me. My anger won't die until that Earth Adept Mage Leon has died in my hands." "Heh. I've discovered that your manticore often disappears for a period of time recently. Have you already discovered traces of the McGrady Guild and are planning on slowly making a move against them?" Trunks said with astonishment when these words were spoken. "It looks like there's something mysterious on you, as if nothing can be hidden from you." "That's right. I'm planning on making a move against the McGrady Guild, but there's an archmage holding down the fort and many other helpers. I can only move stealthily and absolutely don't dare face them head-on. You're still injured, so you won't be of much use if you really do fight. That's why I've excluded you." Looking deeply at Trunks, Han Shuo mused for a moment and then said, "I have a way to deal with the McGrady Guild. I also know they'll pass through here, and it'll be difficult for me to deal with the archmage. As long as you help me deal with the archmage, I'll take care of the rest." "Are you crazy? The McGrady Guild uses earth dragons to travel, and there are more than 100 attendants and guards of all sizes. There are 60 to 70 guards of all professions in this group. Do you think you can deal with so many people with your strength alone?" Trunks stared at Han Shuo and exclaimed in confusion. Smiling faintly and enigmatically, Han Shuo said, "You don't need to worry about that. You'll know why I can deal with them when I show up. From now on, follow the McGrady Guild. You'll see them pay the price before long." After saying these words, Han Shuo didn't wait for Trunks to continue asking and left with a long laugh, walking in another direction, leaving behind a baffled Trunks. When he arrived at the forest troll's holy land, Han Shuo summoned the little skull and had the forest troll guarding this place take out the hidden bamboo raft, bringing him down the river to where the forest troll lived. The little skull's appearance immediately sent the silent forest troll tribe into a state of panic. The forest troll warrior who'd led Han Shuo here immediately sprinted inside when he arrived. Before long, an excited old priest scrambled and crawled in front of the little skull and knelt down, kowtowing loudly. The great goddess Dadera commands you to arm yourselves to the teeth and prepare. The great goddess Dadera plans to bring you to do a big business and rob a large human guild that's passing by. Han Shuo raised his head high and gave his orders arrogantly. When they heard that they were going to rob, all the forest troll, whether old, women, or children, immediately became excited. They waved their weapons with one hand and waved the pockets they carried on their bodies with the other as they yelled loudly. It looked like the robbing nature of this race was something that no one could change. Thank you, great goddess Dadera. Thank you, great goddess Dadera, for your guidance. The old priest was beyond excited and immediately turned around to give orders to the strong troll leader who was running over from afar. When the forest troll leader heard that they were going to rob, he raised a long spear and stood on a high place, mobilizing his men. All sorts of young and strong forest troll automatically lined up in long lines, separated by the troll warriors, hunters, and priests. Before long, 500 to 600 forest troll were all ready to go. Seeing that they were all ready, Han Shuo nodded and didn't say anything else. He gave an order to Little Skull. The high-spirited Little Skull stood on a high place like the forest troll leader, waving the bone knife in his hand high in the air. Little Skull, who was wearing a pirate's eye patch, had the demeanor of a bandit at this moment. Under the old priest's yell, the palanquin that had transported Little Skull last time was brought out again and placed Little Skull inside. Han Shuo took out a black magic robe and wrapped it around his body and head, leading the way towards the path that the McGrady Guild would definitely take. Because the forest troll's reputation was too bad, it would definitely bring him trouble if he were to be found out in the future. Therefore, after some consideration, Han Shuo decided to conceal himself as much as possible. The reason why he sent Odysseus and the others away was because Han Shuo knew that they were too kind and simple. Not only would their presence not be of any use, they might even affect him a little. Therefore, he had no choice but to let them leave first. Han Shuo was very clear about the McGrady Guild's location with the original demon's constant observation. He brought 500 to 600 forest troll to Atanai Mountain. Under Han Shuo's orders, the forest troll began to skillfully set up traps and obstruct their advance. After everything was in place, the oily green-skinned forest troll stood in the thicket at the side and became one with the trees. It would be very difficult to find traces of them if one didn't look closely. Trunks rode his manticore and followed far behind this group of people. Because there were archmages present, Trunks didn't dare make any rash movements and only followed according to Han Shuo's previous orders. After half an hour, the group of people led by the enormous earth dragons gradually appeared. The earth dragons huffed and puffed as they moved forward, the goods on their bodies swaying continuously. Guards of all professions walked at the very front, their vigilant gazes patrolling all around. Han Shuo was quite familiar with two of them and recognized them as the ones who had attacked him in the swamp. Apart from the two earth dragons, there were also a few enormous lizard camels in this wave of McGrady Guild people. A few richly dressed merchants were inside, surrounded by experienced guards. It was no wonder that even Trunks didn't dare act rashly. When they walked into the mountain valley, the sawls of the guards in front of them suddenly gave way and they fell into a trap. Rocks rolled down from the surrounding hills and completely blocked their path. Javelins and spears were thrown from both sides and nailed into the ground beneath these people's feet. Loud cheers suddenly sounded from all directions. The excited forest troll took off the concealment on their bodies. 500 to 600 forest troll hurried over and surrounded the McGrady Guild people. Dadera, Dadera. At this moment, the forest troll discovered that this batch of prey was indeed very large. They all thought that this was indeed a gift from the great goddess Dadera and couldn't help but shout out. The old priest even knelt devoutly in front of Little Skull's palanquin and used an ancient incantation to express his gratitude. Damn it, it's the annoying forest troll. All sorts of complaints suddenly sounded from the McGrady Guild people. When they saw that the newcomers were forest troll, and such a large number of forest troll at that, the McGrady Guild people felt a great headache coming on. Now that the front and back of the caravan were blocked, it didn't look like they could get out of this peacefully. A beautiful, voluptuous woman wearing a gorgeous magic robe and holding a magic staff embedded with many gems slowly walked out from a palanquin at the back. The symbol of the magic staff on her body proved her identity as an archmage. The beautiful woman walked over with a smile and called out in a soft voice, "Hi, is there anyone I can talk to?" "Emissary, do you want to talk to her?" The old priest, who was still kowtowing to Little Skull, couldn't help but turn to stare at Han Shuo, who was hidden in a corner of the palanquin and wrapped in a black magic robe, when he heard the beautiful woman's call. "Go ask her what she wants." Han Shuo nodded and said. Under Han Shuo's orders, the old priest stood far away in front of the beautiful woman under the protection of the forest troll leader. The old priest opened his mouth to ask, "Ugly human girl, what do you have to say?" The beautiful woman had been smiling merrily at first, but her face immediately darkened when she heard the old priest speak. However, it was only for a moment before her expression returned to normal and a smile once again hung on her face. She said, "We're from the McGrady Guild. I know that you forest troll are strong, so I want to negotiate with you. We're willing to pay 10,000 gold coins in the hope that we can leave this place safely. We have a lot of people on our side, so you'll definitely suffer losses if we fight. What do you think?" "Ugly human girl, don't you know that the appetites of our race have always been large?" The old priest looked at the mature, flirtatious woman arrogantly and said in a stiff, cold voice. From Han Shuo's perspective, this beautiful woman had a lithe figure and gorgeous features. She was full of the aura of a mature woman and held a strong attraction for normal human males. It was a pity that the old priest and the others were forest troll, and that the aesthetic standards of humans were completely different from theirs. The beauty in Han Shuo's eyes became a synonym for ugliness in the old priest's eyes. The beautiful woman took another deep breath and controlled herself under the repeated blows of "ugly human girl." However, her gaze was no longer as kind as before as she stared at the old priest and said, "Then, what do you want?" The old priest puffed out his chest and was about to speak when he suddenly remembered Han Shuo's existence and said, "We need to discuss this." The old priest quickly walked towards Han Shuo after saying these words. A few forest troll warriors blocked Han Shuo, so the people around them couldn't even see Han Shuo's existence. The old priest came to Han Shuo's side and looked at Han Shuo. "Emissary, what should we do?" Frowning and looking into the distance, Han Shuo saw Leon appear at the back. The McGrady Guild specialized in smuggling and had some disputes with Phoebe's Guild of Bust. Add to that the fact that these people's previous evil deeds had offended Han Shuo, and so Han Shuo only hesitated for a moment before saying coldly, "There's nothing to say. According to the rules of our race, rob them all. If anyone resists, kill them all." When these words were spoken, the old priest said excitedly, "The emissary is wise. The emissary is wise." The old priest didn't say anything else and walked out from the encirclement of the forest troll warriors, nodding towards the forest troll leader in the distance. The forest troll leader raised the long spear in his hand and gave a high-pitched call. The forest troll warriors surged out from all directions, and after the priests cast magic from the back, they charged fearlessly towards the guards of the guild. "Damn it, these greedy forest troll. Let's fight it out with them." Angry shouts rang out from within the guild. The smile on that coquettish mature beauty's face had also disappeared at this moment. She chanted an incantation and waved the magic staff in her beautiful hand. A grayish-brown ball of air flew out of the magic staff and formed the head of a demon in the air, entangling the forest troll warriors that were charging over first. More than 10 grayish-brown balls of air continuously changed shape in the air and fell into the bodies of the forest troll warriors without any resistance. The troll warriors' rapid running speed suddenly slowed down, as if something strange was happening within their bodies. Sarcomas quickly appeared one after another, swelling and throbbing. They looked very frightening. With a PU, the sarcomas on the body of the first forest troll exploded, and dark black liquid seeped out from within. The liquid remained on their bodies and carried an incredibly strong corrosive effect, causing the forest troll to wail like ghosts and howl like wolves as their bodies gradually melted into liquid. The other forest troll that was splashed by the liquid also emitted thick white smoke from their bodies, appearing to be in great pain. When Han Shuo, who was at the back of the group, saw this Archmage's attack, he recalled some of Fanny's magic explanations and recognized that this was the high-level dark magic, Devil's Haunt. He also finally knew that this flirtatious mature woman was actually a terrifying dark Archmage. The tragic deaths of the first 10 forest troll warriors had caused a certain degree of panic among the forest troll. However, it was a good thing that the forest troll race had always survived in the midst of cruel pillaging. Although there was a short period of panic, they still continued to advance due to their large numbers. A sharp whistle suddenly emitted from Han Shua's mouth. When Trunks, who had been observing everything from the shadows, heard Han Shua's signal, he was a bit confused. This was because Han Shua's whistle had come from within the forest troll. No matter how Trunks imagined, he would never have thought that Han Shua would be mixed in with the forest troll. However, out of his trust in Han Shua, Trunks still abruptly dashed out from his hiding place according to their previous agreement and charged towards the female Dark Archmage who was wreaking havoc on the forest troll. Trunks, who was riding on his manticore, gripped his long sword and locked onto the female Archmage. Taking advantage of everyone's panic and confusion, he charged towards the female Archmage, planning to first entangle her because the power of her dark magic was too great. Normal people wouldn't be able to defend against it. It's that Trunks. Everyone stop him. Don't let him near me no matter what. The female Dark Archmage actually quickly discovered Trunks and immediately yelled out in a high voice. 5 or 6 senior swordsmen, archers, and other mages immediately ran over from all directions to block the Dark Archmage when they heard the female Dark Archmage's yell. This group of people immediately launched their attacks, forcing Trunks to be unable to easily approach. The female Archmage didn't pay attention to Trunks as she released one powerful dark magic after another with her back facing Trunks. The dozens of troll warriors that had rushed over fell one by one. Not a single one was able to approach the female Archmage. Emissary, what should we do? The old priest saw the forest troll warriors die one by one and scrambled to Han Shua's side, asking in a panic. Staring at the frightening female Archmage for a long time, Han Shua felt that he would still be hard-pressed to escape death if he rushed over. The invasion of the dark magic on the physical body was too frightening. It looked like perhaps only the little skull, which was purely made up of bones, wouldn't need to fear the invasion of the dark magic. Look, the great goddess Dadera has come out. Pointing at the little skull that had stepped out of the palanquin, Han Shui comforted the old priest. When he discovered that the little skull had killed an intermediate swordsman, he couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Stop him! Stop him! Emily had also witnessed the little skull's miraculous performance. The mocking smile that had just bloomed on her face had long since disappeared, and her heart was in a mess as she cried out delicately. Several intermediate and advanced dark magic spells were suddenly chanted by her quickly. These dark magic spells directly fell on the little skull's body. However, the little skull, whose body was completely composed of bones and had been repeatedly forged by Han Shua's magical arts, didn't react at all. It just stood there in a daze and looked at Emily in confusion, as if wondering why Emily's attacks were so powerless. Goddess Dadera has already shown her might. What are you all still standing there for? Han Shua, who had been hiding in the distance, suddenly yelled out coldly at this moment and gave the little skull another order to attack the female magister Emily. A burst of gibberish suddenly came from the mouths of the old priest and the troll leader. When the troll warriors behind the little skull saw that the terrifying Emily couldn't do anything to the little skull, they all shouted Dadera in excitement and once again charged at them without fear of death. The troll hunters in the distance shot out a dense barrage of javelins and spears at the McGrady Guild's guards. Some of the archers and priests who had their bows drawn were hit by the row of javelins and spears. Their bodies were riddled with holes as they fell to the ground, foaming with blood. Block that damned skeletal warrior for me. Emily was a bit flustered when she saw that the little skull was chasing after her. After a few dark spells had no effect on the little skull, Emily finally realized that this strange little skull had an extremely strong defense against dark spells. As she yelled, Emily held onto her magic robe with her hands and fled in a sorry state. Her plump buttocks swayed continuously, and she no longer had time to cast the powerful and terrifying dark spells. Because of Emily's retreat, the pressure on the troll warriors was greatly reduced. Coupled with the strong morale boosted by the little skull, these faithful religious believers didn't care about the casualties around them as they charged at the McGrady Guild's guards like a tide. At this moment, the troll warriors who hadn't approached them all this time finally surged towards the McGrady Guild after paying the price of a few dozen troll warriors. They were entangled with the guards of various professions. The low roars of the earth dragons, the stomping of the lizard beasts, the panicked shouts of the merchants, and the sounds of fighting between the troll warriors and the guards filled the entire field in an instant. The advantage in numbers quickly showed itself. How did you know it would be me? After revealing his head, Han Shua looked at Trunks in surprise and asked, I didn't completely recognize you, but it could. Trunks shrugged with a smile and pointed at the manticore beneath him. Nodding, Han Shua said, So that's how it is. It's you guys. What do you want? Leon immediately recognized the Han Shua that was still fresh in his memory when he saw Han Shua reveal his appearance. He called out with a bit of fear in his voice. Of course I want you to die. A debt of blood must be paid in blood. The harm you've done to me should be repaid now, right? Han Shua looked coldly at Leon and was about to charge at Leon after saying these words in a casual manner. Han, leave this person to me. You haven't fully recovered from your injuries, so it's best if you don't act rashly. When Trunks saw that Han Shua was about to make a move, he suddenly called out to stop him. He didn't wait for Han Shua to respond and had already urged his manticore to charge at Leon. The Earth Adept Mage Leon immediately chanted a magical incantation when he saw Trunks approach with his manticore. The ground in front of him suddenly began to churn violently and a wall of earth quickly formed, blocking the path that Trunks was charging at. Leon, who'd cast the earth wall, understood that one Trunks was enough to take his life. Not to mention that there was also a Han Shua of unknown strength nearby. He didn't dare linger at all and hurriedly fled for his life as soon as the earth wall appeared. Don't worry, I'll kill him. Trunks smiled faintly at Han Shua as he rode on his manticore and charged at the earth wall with the manticore. Under the brandishing of the manticore and the long sword in his hand, the earth wall that had just formed collapsed with a loud rumble. After leaping over the earth wall, Trunks chased after the fleeing Leon unhurriedly, appearing to be quite relaxed. The original demons were scattered in 3 directions, and Han Shua observed the entire situation through the observation of the original demons. He discovered that the forest troll, who had the advantage in numbers, had completely grasped the situation as the cowardly merchant group took the lead in fleeing. Following their attacks, the guards of the merchant group retreated step by step. No one else risked their lives to protect this batch of goods, and only did their utmost to break out of the encirclement. Little Skull followed Han Shua's orders and chased after the female Dark Archmage with unyielding determination. A few forest troll followed closely behind their great Goddadera and dealt with the female Archmage together with Little Skull. With Little Skull leading the charge, the female Archmage was unable to use dark magic and was blocked by the forest troll from all directions. In the end, the female Archmage, Emily, was forced to fall into a trap and was caught in a large net made of tree branches. I have something you need. You can't kill me. You can't. Emily suddenly yelled, just as the javelins and spears were about to fire at the female Archmage. Han Shua's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately gave an order to Little Skull. After Little Skull received the order, he raised his empty left hand and made a pause gesture to the surrounding forest troll. Then, under Emily's horrified gaze, Little Skull walked towards her with a bone dagger in hand. He casually tore the clothes off the corpse of a nearby guard and arrived in front of Emily. He stuffed the cloth strip into her mouth and tied Emily's hands and feet with rope at the same time. After this female Dark Archmage's bright red mouth was stuffed, She continuously let out woo-woo sounds, but no one paid any attention to her. Little Skull held the bone dagger and stood guard on the side. Han Shuo made use of the inspection of the original demons to continuously give orders to the forest troll, pointing them in the direction of the escapees and allowing them to spread the spoils of battle to the greatest extent. The scattered sounds of fighting in the surroundings all ceased after half an hour. When the manticore in the distance approached, the forest troll tried to kill Trunks, but stopped under Han Shuo's orders. When Trunks spurred the manticore to Han Shuo's side, he suddenly understood something when he saw the forest troll on the side looking at Han Shuo with a humble and respectful expression. "I'll explain it to you in detail in a moment. Trunks, you must believe me." Han Shuo also saw the odd look in Trunks' eyes and opened his mouth to speak apologetically. Trunks smiled and nodded, saying, "I'll wait for you to explain when I have time." Looking gratefully at Trunks, Han Shuo walked towards the female dark archmage and roughly tore off the cloth in her mouth. He lowered his body to look at Emily and said coldly, "Give me a reason not to kill you." Chapter 119. Emily, with her hands and feet bound, suddenly moved with all her might when Han Shuo approached her. Her bright red lips left a red mark on Han Shuo's left cheek with a pu sound. "Oh heh, you've been hit by my curse. If I die, you'll be cursed until your entire body rots away and you die." Emily immediately looked at Han Shuo calmly and said with a smile. A strange energy instantly flowed into Han Shuo's body from the place where Emily had kissed him. When Han Shuo wanted to investigate the location of the energy, he suddenly discovered that the strange energy had already disappeared without a trace. Curse magic was the most bizarre and mysterious magic of the Dark Major. Many ancient legends had described the terror and mysteriousness of curse magic. When that strange energy had flowed into Han Shuo's body just now, Han Shuo had clearly felt it. He understood that this dark archmage Emily wasn't just shooting at random. Han Shuo's expression wavered as he looked at Emily, who was extraordinarily pleased with herself. He seemed to be hesitating on whether or not to kill her. With magical yuan protecting him, Han Shuo didn't think that this kind of curse magic would be able to stop him, but he still didn't dare take the risk. "Han, it's best if you don't act blindly without thinking. The Dark Major's curse magic is one of the most mysterious types of magic. It can often achieve some truly terrifying things. We can leave this woman alive for now, and it won't be too late to kill her when we find a way to dispel the curse." Trunks thought for a moment when he saw Han Shuo furrow his brow in thought. Nodding, Han Shuo chuckled oddly as his eyes roamed over Emily's voluptuous, alluring, and mature body with ill intent. Emily's figure was lithe and graceful, especially the pair of heavy, full breasts that looked like they would burst out of her clothes at any moment. Her sexy lips were bright red, and the corners of her mouth hooked up into a slutty smile. It was full of naked carnal temptation to men. Emily giggled delicately under Han Shuo's odd gaze as her body swayed within the net. The sturdy tree branches tightened around her body, making her curves appear even more wonderful and exuding a strong sense of temptation. Not bad, not bad. I won't let you die, but I still have many ways to slowly make you help me dispel the curse." Han Shuo stared deeply at Emily and said evilly to the old priest, "I think this beautiful and mature woman should be shared with our strong forest troll warriors." When these words were said, Emily, who had been giggling in delight, immediately screamed, "You can't do this." "Heh, why can't I? I'll have the forest troll be careful when they rape you. They definitely won't kill you. Don't worry." Smirking evilly as he looked at the shocked Emily, it was now Han Shuo's turn to be calm and unruffled in the midst of chaos. "All right, then I won't ask any more. Continue with your matters. I need to train in the depths of the dark forest. Remember what you promised me. I'll have you help me when I feel the time is right. I think we'll have many more chances to meet in the future. When I've finished taking care of the matters on hand, I'll also train in the depths of the dark forest. I'll think of a way to find you then." By now, the two of them had truly treated each other as friends. However, everyone had their own secrets. Han Shua's current base of operations was the Cemetery of Death, and he still had necromancy magic to study. In addition, he needed to report to the Dark Mantle organization from the Empire, and he also needed to prepare the dwarves' rations. He couldn't go to the depths of the Dark Forest for the time being. There wasn't too much sadness in parting ways with Trunks. After Han Shua sensed the location of the original demon and the little skull, he walked in the direction of the Forest Troll. He met up with the Forest Troll and returned to the Forest Troll clan together. This time, the Forest Troll had mobilized 500 to 600 people, each of them carrying a sack specifically for looting. After everyone had set off, they brought all the spoils of war back to the Forest Troll clan in one go. The McGrady merchant caravan had transported luxurious silks, soft and comfortable carpets, and other luxuries enjoyed by nobles. Apart from that, there were also some enormous chariots and siege equipment. The luxuries were still manageable, but the chariots and siege equipment could cause great trouble if they weren't being supplied to the Empire's military when they were transported to the Empire. Han Shua had learned from Phoebe that the McGrady merchant caravan was involved in smuggling. It looked like those things weren't being supplied to the Empire's military. It looked like the McGrady merchant caravan was quite bold indeed. The luxuries were usually stored in the space rings of the dead merchants. The enormous chariots and siege equipment couldn't be stored in space rings, so they were transported by Earth Dragons. After returning to the Forest Troll clan, Han Shua made an inventory of the resources. The Forest Troll had filled 2 warehouses full of luxuries and 3 warehouses full of warhorses and siege equipment. Looking at the 5 warehouses full of resources, Han Shua didn't know what to do with them. The space ring on his hand was already filled with some gemstones and gold from the Forest Troll's holy land, and there was no way for it to hold any more things. Staring at the Forest Troll's warehouses full of resources, Han Shua couldn't help but smile wryly. Right, how do you usually deal with the things you've looted? The Forest Troll weren't a race with high intelligence that knew how to enjoy life. So Han Shua wanted to ask the Forest Troll what they'd done in the past when he saw these items. Someone will come specifically and use food, weapons, and daily necessities to trade for these resources with us. The things we have no use for, but others need them dearly. This much is enough for us to trade for a whole winter's worth of food and necessities. Many thanks to the great goddess Datara's grace. It was the great goddess Datara who pointed us in the right direction. The old priest explained to Han Shua. Nodding, Han Shua thought that this was indeed the case. The merchants who traded with the Forest Troll must have obtained the Forest Troll's trust and brought the food and necessities they needed, including weapons, to trade for these priceless items. The value of food and necessities wasn't high within the Empire. If they were transported here to trade for the expensive items the Forest Troll had plundered, the merchants would surely be able to earn an eye-watering profit. It was no wonder that so many merchants would still rush into the dark forest with no regard for their lives, despite the dangers lurking everywhere. The dark forest would be very cold when winter arrived, and many magical creatures wouldn't appear then. Some merchants and adventurers wouldn't easily enter the dark forest during the winter when the roads were blocked by snow. Therefore, every race had to prepare food and necessities for the winter as early as possible. Otherwise, it would be very difficult when winter arrived. This was why the dwarves were worried, and why the Forest Troll had to plunder and replenish their supplies for the winter. Don't trade these items with anyone in the future. Keep them all in the storehouse. As the emissary of the great goddess Datara, I will help you trade these items for enough food and necessities for you to enjoy, including weapons. Do you understand? Don't let the goodies flow out to outsiders. Han Shua felt a pang of heartache when he thought of the unscrupulous merchants using crude rations to trade for large amounts of good stuff from the foolish Forest Troll. Therefore, he used Datara's name to give the old priest another order. The old priest started and nodded to indicate that he understood Han Shua's orders. He seemed to feel that Han Shua's orders were a bit baffling, but the old priest was used to obedience and didn't ask any further questions. Don't move out again in this period of time. The great goddess Datara and I will take a look around. When we find a better target, we'll notify you to move out. The next time I come, I'll bring some rations and necessities for you to use. Don't worry, Han Shua said to the old priest after thinking for a bit. Emissary, what should we do with that ugly woman? The old priest nodded in agreement and asked about the thorny matter of Emily. Han Shuo also felt a bit of a headache when he asked this. He thought for a bit and said, "I'll take her away." Han Shuo only removed Emily's blindfold and mouth when they arrived at a pool a few miles away from the forest troll's territory. Two zombie warriors carried Emily in the net along the way, and Han Shuo completely ignored her whimpers along the way. The location of the forest troll's territory couldn't be exposed no matter what. Therefore, Han Shuo had no choice but to use this method. When they arrived at the side of the pool and the bindings on her eyes and mouth were removed, Emily cursed at Han Shuo. Han Shuo turned a blind eye to Emily's incantations and unbuttoned his clothes to reveal a well-proportioned and robust body. Contrary to Han Shuo's expectations, a bit of panic appeared in Emily's eyes when she saw Han Shuo take off his clothes without saying a word. She hurriedly said, What are you doing?" Han Shuo had only wanted to go into the pool to take a bath, but when he saw the panic in Emily's eyes, a plan formed in his mind. A lewd smile immediately appeared at the corners of his lips, and he chuckled oddly as he approached Emily step by step. His eyes wandered wantonly over Emily's mature and well-rounded body as he asked in return, "What do you think I'm doing?" Ahaha. Chapter 120. Emily's body was lithe and graceful, her twin peaks full. Her mature body's curves were revealed after the net was tightened, possessing a fatal allure to men. The panic in Emily's eyes increased this allure even further. Han Shuo had originally only intended to intimidate Emily, but as he slowly approached, an uncontrollable desire suddenly burst forth from the bottom of his heart. It was as hard to control as a landslide. The speed at which the magical yuan circulated was much faster than usual. Panting heavily, Han Shuo's mind suddenly became muddled, and his mind slowly became muddled. "No, please let me go. I'll help you remove the curse." Emily was truly panicking now. She could no longer suppress the fear in her heart as she watched Han Shuo pounce towards her like a wild beast. She began to cry out in panic. Unfortunately, the only response she got was a low growl from Han Shuo. Han Shuo had already rushed in front of her in the next moment, violently picking up another rag and gagging her crimson lips. With her hands and feet bound by ropes, Emily could only emit panicked whimpers after her lips were gagged. What followed the whimpers was the falling of the net that bound her body, as well as the sound of her gorgeous clothes being roughly torn apart. Han Shuo, with his well-proportioned muscles, had eyes as red as a wolf's as he exerted force with his hands, causing Emily's undergarments to fly off piece by piece, revealing Emily's heavy, white, and full breasts. After being injured, Han Shuo's mind was the hardest to control in the molded spirit realm. Under such strong allure, he finally lost control of his mind and pounced forward. Emily, with her hands and feet bound by ropes, was caught in Han Shuo's arms and pushed against a nearby tree. One of his hands started to rub Ai Meili's voluptuous breasts without any restraint. He couldn't even grasp them with one hand. Ai Meili's left breast kept changing shape in his hand, and her right breast bounced up and down beautifully. His other hand violently tore at Emily's lower body's clothing. When her perky buttocks were exposed to the air, Emily knew that her undergarments had also been torn. She shook her head even more frantically and began to struggle fiercely in Han Shuo's tight hold. Unfortunately, a mage was still a mage, even if she had reached the level of a magister. Even an archmage like her was far inferior to Han Shuo's. Emily's struggles were extremely powerless, and her breasts rammed against Han Shuo's chest as she struggled. Her firm and slender thighs were also entangled with Han Shuo's legs due to her twisting. Her powerless struggles actually encouraged Han Shuo's ruthlessness. Her gorgeous satin undergarments were torn into strips, hanging on her white skin. Most of her heavy, plump breasts and smooth buttocks were already exposed in front of Han Shuo. With a soft ripping sound, Han Shuo's clothes were also torn apart by himself. Immediately after, Han Shuo, who was tightly pressed against Emily, used his knees to forcefully separate Emily's thighs and fiercely thrust his vicious-looking object inside. A woo-woo sound mixed with intense pain once again came out of Emily's mouth. Tears instantly filled Emily's eyes, and 2 lines of sparkling tears flowed down her cheeks and into her neck. Han Shuo, who had already sunk into madness, didn't have the slightest bit of tenderness for the fairer sex. His body, which had been repeatedly forged by demonic magic, had unimaginable stamina and capital. Amidst Emily's woo-woo sounds, Han Shuo released his boundless stamina to his heart's content, venting the energy he had accumulated over the years on Emily's mature and wonderful body. After a long, long time, his mind gradually became clear. Han Shuo seemed to have experienced a great battle, and his entire body was filled with indescribable joy and comfort. Many red handprints appeared on Emily's naked body as she was tightly held against the tree. It was obvious that she had been clawed. Although there were 2 lines of tear stains on her beautiful face, they were an intoxicating bright red. She was unconscious with an extremely satisfied expression. Han Shuo slowly recalled everything that had happened. At this moment, his lower body was still in the warm, smooth, and soft hole. Han Shuo maintained this position and thought for a while. He pulled his lower body away from Emily's private area and silently took out a loose robe from his space ring to cover Emily's naked body. When he got up and walked to the side of the pool, Han Shuo suddenly felt refreshed. The heavy injuries he had suffered a few days ago seemed to have suddenly recovered. When he walked into the pool to wash his body, Han Shuo suddenly noticed that there were actually red bloodstains on his lower body and legs. Immediately startled, Han Shuo's gaze fell on the fainted Emily's body. Emily, who had a well-developed, mature, and graceful figure, looked like a beautiful woman. Her behavior also seemed to be a bit dissolute. Originally, Han Shuo thought that she must have been on the battlefield for a long time, but he didn't expect that it was actually her first time. This was really too unimaginable. No wonder Emily's eyes appeared to be so flustered when she saw him reveal his obscene expression at the beginning. No wonder Emily would whimper in pain at the beginning and only let out involuntary moans later on. In the end, Emily was also in a delirious state and constantly responded to him. If this Emily's body was already dirty, Han Shuo wouldn't have too much of a burden. A mature woman shouldn't care too much about this. But now, Emily's physical condition clearly proved that Han Shuo was actually her first man. This immediately made the nature of this matter a bit different. Han Shuo, who was washing his body, had a terrible headache thinking about how to deal with it. For a moment, his mind was in a mess, and he couldn't find a suitable way to deal with this matter no matter what. Just like this, Han Shuo unconsciously washed his body in the pool. It wasn't until a low moan sounded that Han Shuo suddenly woke up. On the opposite side, both of Emily's hands were tied, and her mouth was still stuffed with a bundle of rags. She seemed to have just woken up, and at this moment, she was looking at Han Shuo with a terrifying gaze. Emily's bright eyes were filled with hatred, grief, and hesitation. She stared coldly at Han Shuo in the water without blinking. Scratching his head awkwardly, Han Shuo felt his scalp go a bit numb. He hesitated and hesitated again and again, and finally walked out of the pool. He took out a new set of clothes from his space ring and put them on. He smiled sheepishly at Emily and said, "I didn't do it on purpose. It was just an accident." Emily was still looking at Han Shuo with that terrifying gaze. When Han Shuo arrived in front of her, he suddenly remembered that her mouth was still stuffed, and she probably couldn't speak. Taking a deep breath, he first summoned the little skull, and then Han Shuo removed the bundle of rags from Emily's mouth. As expected, when the rags were removed from Emily's mouth, a string of angry curses shot out from Emily's mouth like cannonballs. With a choked-up voice, Emily used all sorts of vicious words to curse Han Shuo for being shameless and worse than a beast. She cursed for half an hour and only stopped when she couldn't take it anymore. She then sobbed softly and said a few words that Han Shuo couldn't hear clearly. Seeing that Emily's out-of-control emotions were slowly calming down, Han Shuo's drooping head finally opened his mouth and said awkwardly, "We're all adults, and it was my first time as well. You didn't lose out anyway, so let's just let it go. Let go of me, let go of me. You damned brat, I'll kill you." Emily had finally managed to control herself, but when she heard Han Shua's words, she struggled as if she wanted to fight to the death with Han Shua. His scalp tingling as he took a step back, Han Shua smiled wryly and spread out his hands. He asked Emily, "How did I know it was your first time? Now that it's happened, what do you think I should do? You brat who's worse than a beast, you shamelessly raped me. What do you think I should do?" Emily's eyes looked like they were about to spit fire as she glared at Han Shua and yelled angrily, "Although you were in a bit of pain at first, I saw that you were quite comfortable later on. It was my first time anyways, so you didn't lose out too much. If worst comes to worst, I'll let you go, and then we'll go our separate ways and pretend we don't know each other." Han Shua furrowed his brow and thought carefully for a moment before suggesting to Emily, "Shut up." Emily yelled out, giving Han Shua fright. Emily was silent for a moment, first showing a weak expression of resignation. She then stared directly into Han Shua's eyes and said with a calm expression, "If you don't give me an explanation, I'll immediately commit suicide. As soon as I die, the curse will take effect and you'll be hard-pressed to escape death." Scratching his head out of habit, Han Shua smiled wryly and walked towards Emily. He took out the demon's lair edge and helped Emily cut off the restraints on her hands and feet. He said gently, "Wash up first, we'll talk in a bit." Han Shua raised his vigilance as he spoke, inwardly guarding against Emily's sudden outburst of violence and harm him. However, Emily didn't make any abnormal movements after the restraints on her body were removed. Her eyes only continuously roamed over Han Shua's body, seeming to want to see Han Shua clearly. Emily nodded her head apathetically after staring at Han Shua for a while. She tightened the robes around her body and walked towards the pool. Emily's body stumbled halfway, and she almost fell to the ground. Her face flushed red, and she cursed lowly before slowing down her steps. When she walked into the pool, she threw the robes around her body far away in front of Han Shua, revealing her graceful, mature body. She began to wash up without any reservations. Looking fiercely at Emily's mature body, Han Shua, who'd just experienced the pleasure of intimacy, felt his heart run wild again. However, he said with a deadpan expression, "Hey, I'm still here. It won't be good for you to take off all your clothes and wash up, will it?" Suddenly turning around, Emily's towering twin peaks, smooth abdomen, and a smear of dark skin between her legs were completely exposed to Han Shua. Glaring fiercely at Han Shua, Emily said, "You've seen and touched, and now you're pretending to be proper in front of me. You really aren't just ordinarily shameless. Humph, if I go too far away, who knows if you'll take the opportunity to escape. I'll watch you closely." Originally, Han Shua really did plan on taking the opportunity to escape, but when he heard her say this, he smiled awkwardly and said, "I'm not that kind of irresponsible person. Heh, take your time washing up, I'll keep watch for you." After a while, under Han Shua's visual enjoyment, Emily, who'd washed herself clean and changed into a new set of gorgeous magic robes, walked up to Han Shua with her radiant beauty. She first looked at the little skull holding the bone knife next to her with surprise, then stared at Han Shua and asked, after thinking for so long, "Do you know how to explain yourself to me?" Han Shua, who'd been watching for a long time, pulled Emily into his arms and fiercely kissed Emily's rosy lips. His large hands began to roam unceremoniously all over Emily's voluptuous body. An intoxicating and wonderful feeling slowly spread in Han Shua's heart as their tongues intertwined and rubbed. Emily struggled fiercely at first, but even though the restraints on her hands and feet were removed, Emily still couldn't break free from Han Shua's embrace. Under the effects of Han Shua's long kiss, her body actually slowly softened and her struggles became more and more powerless. In the end, her tongue actually took the initiative to entangle in Han Shua's mouth like a little snake. After a while, when the two felt that it was difficult to breathe, they finally separated while panting heavily. Then, Han Shua nibbled on the sensitive tip of Emily's red ear and said softly, "Then, you're my woman?" When these words were spoken, Emily's body first stiffened, and then she wrapped around Han Shua like a snake. She also bit on the tip of Han Shua's ear and said, "Humph, shameless brat. At least you know what's good for you." Laughing wildly and complacently, Han Shua grabbed Emily by the waist and picked her up. Amidst Emily's unrelenting cries, he gave her another round of fierce conquest, only stopping when Emily was about to faint. 3 days later, Han Shua and Emily appeared on the road to the cemetery of death. The two had originally been hostile, but after 3 days of entanglement and intimacy, they suddenly seemed incomparably close. During this process, Han Shua's strong physique made Emily feel as if she wanted to die. For the first 2 days, Emily walked unsteadily, and Emily's initial extreme satisfaction turned into fear and trepidation. She had no choice but to beg Han Shua to let go in the end to recover. Having tasted the sweetness, Han Shua finally knew that the taste of a woman was indeed indescribably wonderful. These 2 days of conquest made Han Shua feel that he had lived his life in vain. He had completely indulged himself in depravity. As they got closer and closer to the cemetery of death, Han Shua suddenly had a preposterous feeling as he looked at the beautiful Emily beside him. Neither of the two had taken the initiative to reveal their identities, and neither had asked the other. Therefore, even now, Han Shua didn't know Emily's identity. At this time, the only thing that Han Shua felt was inappropriate was that he didn't know how to face Fanny in the future. Han Shua had true feelings for Fanny. This Emily had only come together because of the absurd situation. He didn't know how to deal with her in the future, so he could only take one step at a time. However, as they got closer to the cemetery of death, Han Shua couldn't help but worry. The cemetery of death was Han Shua's greatest secret. The fastest way to the Empire was through the transportation matrix in the cemetery of death. However, Emily had made it clear that she wanted to pester him. Now that he didn't know anything about Emily's identity, Han Shua didn't dare to take the risk of telling her this secret. Therefore, he appeared to be in a difficult position. "Don't worry, the curse technique that I cast on you was only a lie." It looked like Camilla had indeed been disposed of by the dark mantle. "Hey, hey, hey!" A shout that grew louder and louder abruptly rang out from Emily's mouth. When Han Shua came back to his senses, Emily gently rubbed Han Shua's face and asked merrily, "My adorable little brat, what evil thoughts are you thinking of that made you so engrossed in your thoughts?" There's a sound from the south. Let's go take a look." Duke, who was walking over unhurriedly, suddenly made a shushing gesture at Eric and then spoke softly. He immediately used a levitation spell to fly up and quickly approached Han Shua and Emily. "Someone's coming. Let's hurry and hide." Han Shua had been about to respond when he sensed Duke's movements and hastily called out to Emily. He used the observation of the other original demon to grab Emily's waist and run towards a large tree on the left. When they arrived, Han Shua said lowly, "Use a levitation spell to climb up the tree and stay with me." Han Shua agilely climbed up the tree after he'd spoken. He landed in a large patch of dense foliage in the blink of an eye and waved his hand at Emily, who was already floating in the middle of the tree. "Why didn't I hear anything? Aren't you making too much of a fuss over nothing?" Emily asked softly, puzzled, but obediently made her way into the dense foliage and leaned comfortably against Han Shua, twisting her snake-like body. "Sure." Han Shua made a shushing gesture and then took a deep breath. His heartbeat and breathing immediately calmed down. Emily had originally thought that Han Shua was making a fuss over nothing and was about to tease Han Shua again when she suddenly frowned and also felt movement. Emily chanted a magical incantation in a low voice, and a cloud of gray mist appeared out of thin air, enveloping the two's position. As an archmage as well, Emily naturally had sensitive hearing. However, because a wind archmage trained in the wind element, her hearing was indeed a bit more sensitive than the average archmage's. Otherwise, Duke wouldn't have been able to hear Emily's shout at all. "It's Duke of Kasi Empire." Emily's eyes suddenly revealed a murderous intent when Duke appeared, and she exclaimed lowly. Han Shua was shocked when he heard these words and looked at Emily with great astonishment. He never would have thought that Emily would know Duke. Chapter 121. Duke had used a levitation spell to arrive here and surveyed the surroundings from above, but didn't discover anything out of the ordinary. After a while, the senior swordsman Eric also hurried over from afar and carefully flipped through the bushes for a while. He raised his head and said to Duke in the sky, "Mr. Duke, there's no movement." Wind Archmage Duke closed his eyes and didn't respond. He concentrated on listening to the sound of the wind, as if he wanted to obtain some clues from the sound of the wind. Han Shuo and Emily were completely concealed within the dense foliage. Emily had also set up a layer of dark major magic barrier around them. Dark major magic was mysterious and unfathomable, and had always been adept at concealment. Duke should have a hard time detecting the dark major magic barrier that Emily had set up as a fellow Archmage. After a low exclamation, Emily looked at Han Shuo with extreme astonishment and said, "How did you do it?" Startled, Han Shuo looked at Duke in the distance and made a careful hand gesture, indicating that Emily shouldn't speak and disturb Duke and Eric. Extending a slender finger to tap Han Shuo's forehead, Emily said with a smile, "What are you so sneaky about? There are dense foliage around us, and the barrier I just set up also has sound insulation. Even if Duke is a wind archmage, he can forget about hearing our conversation. What are you so worried about?" Emily spoke several times in a row, but Duke continued to listen with his eyes closed in the distance. It looked like he really hadn't discovered anything. Letting out a sigh of relief, Han Shuo grabbed Emily's finger and licked it, causing Emily to roll her eyes at Han Shuo. "Hurry up and tell me. How did you do it?" Emily stared at Han Shuo with a flushed face and asked. At this moment, Emily was leaning on Han Shuo's left side, with most of her body pressed against Han Shuo. Her full breasts were resting on Han Shuo's left arm, and her slender, smooth thighs were pressed tightly against Han Shuo's waist. The alluring Emily had an irresistible allure to Han Shuo, who had just had a taste. Chuckling softly, Han Shuo said, "So there's sound insulation. Heh, we haven't tried doing it on a tree yet." Han Shuo pulled Emily into his arms as soon as he'd finished speaking. He moved to hold her perky but encoiled it around her waist, immediately moving his hands up and down her body without restraint. Emily, who had just been licked by Han Shuo, was so unbridled by Han Shuo's teasing that her cheeks and neck were flushed red. She opened her mouth and gasped, "Duke is right beside us, and there's also Eric observing below. We can't do this. It's too embarrassing." "It's fine. This is more exciting, eh?" After taking off Emily's clothes, Han Shuo moved his mouth close to Emily's fragrant ears, gently kissing them while whispering with a smirk. After such a series of teasing, Emily finally couldn't hold it in anymore and let out a seductive moan from her fragrant lips. He forgot all the words he had just said, and no longer cared that he was on a big tree and that there were two enemies observing him. He took the initiative to reach out and take off Han Shuo's clothes, twisting his plump buttocks to find a position. Oh! As soon as they entered, the two of them let out an ecstatic moan at the same time. After a moment, when Emily's entire body went limp and she cried out loudly, everything slowly calmed down. Maintaining her original position, Emily lay on Han Shuo's chest and used her index finger to draw small circles on Han Shuo's chest. She asked again, "How did you do that just now?" At this time, Wind Archmage Duke and Eric had long since left. An original demon was trailing far behind the two of them, reflecting everything it observed into Han Shuo's mind. Because the two of them had come with the goal of searching the cemetery of death, their walking speed wasn't fast. It would be difficult for them to escape the surveillance of the original demon in a short amount of time, and thus Han Shuo wasn't in a hurry. His large hand unconsciously moved up and down Emily's smooth back as Han Shuo asked, "What do you mean? How did I do it? I'm a dark archmage, but even I wasn't able to detect Duke's approach. You're only a little necromancer. How did you detect this activity? In addition, as a mage, your proficiency and agility in climbing trees is even more exaggerated than the average swordsman. I even saw how you adjusted your breathing and heartbeat. What's going on?" Under Han Shuo's affectionate caresses, Emily moaned softly as she asked Han Shuo. After a moment of silence, Han Shuo opened his mouth to speak. Apart from training in necromancy magic, I've also trained in a set of miraculous martial arts techniques. This set of miraculous martial arts techniques is different from the usual fighting aura, and thus I can be considered a magic swordsman. The uniqueness just now was all due to the influence of this martial arts technique. Straightening her body slightly, Emily looked at Han Shuo in amazement. There's such a miraculous martial arts technique, then can you fight like a swordsman? Nodding his head, Han Shuo said with certainty, of course I can. Then his brow creased. Han Shuo looked doubtfully at Emily and asked, how do you know these two people? It was Emily's turn to be silent after these words were spoken. Emily hesitated for a moment before slowly saying, I've never told you everything about myself because I was afraid of bringing you trouble. I'm actually a citizen of the Lancelot Empire. The reason I've escorted the goods that Medivh smuggled back to the Brute Merchant Alliance this time was to investigate a matter. I wanted to find out just who in the Empire this batch of war materials was being sent to. Frankly speaking, I belong to a secret organization. Duke and Eric harbored unspeakable secrets when they came to the Empire this time. Their actions threatened the Empire's interests, so our organization made a move against the two. Although I'm not in the Empire, I have the authority to know everything that happened. I also saw Duke and Eric's portraits in the organization's data. The organization is currently sending people to track down the two's whereabouts, saying that they may have appeared at the Empire's borders. Because I was returning to the Empire from the borders, I paid some attention and found out so much information. Although our organization has its own individual space and usually won't interfere with everyone's lives, it won't do you much good if you know too much. A soft voice sounded from Emily's mouth as she narrated the course of events, including Emily's identity. When Emily finished speaking, Han Shuo suddenly had a strange smile on his face. This gave Emily a fright, thinking that something had happened to Han Shuo. What's wrong? Are you scared? Don't worry, our organization listens directly to His Majesty the King and only exists for the sake of the Empire's safety. Moreover, we won't interfere with the lives of our members. I don't think we'll be a threat to you. Oh, are you afraid of me? Are you preparing to abandon me? Emily first explained. But when she saw Han Shuo shake his head and smile strangely, she couldn't help but feel a little scared. This man had already obtained everything she wanted, and was so cute when he was bad. Her heart had finally enjoyed a few days of peace and comfort after so many years. No matter what, she couldn't just let him leave, Emily thought in a fluster. Amidst Emily's fear, her previously flushed face appeared to be at a loss for what to do. Towards the end, her voice sounded like she was about to cry. No matter how strong and mature a woman was, once she gave her heart and soul to a man, she would show weakness and fear in front of the man who had obtained everything she wanted. Emily was naturally no exception. After a while, Han Shuo looked at Emily with a shadow of a smile and said, Your organization is called the Dark Mantle, right? Shocked, Emily straightened her body and looked at Han Shuo with extreme shock. She asked, How did you know? The space ring lit up and the iron medallion that symbolized the identity of a Dark Mantle member suddenly appeared in Han Shuo's palm. Han Shuo said to Emily, Because I'm also a Dark Mantle member. Emily, heh, who would have thought that we'd be on the same side? Quick, let me see your iron medallion and let me know what level you're at. Han Shuo laughed strangely as he held Emily's small hand and touched her space ring with his finger. Annoying, bad brat. Emily stared blankly for a while, then suddenly started giggling. She suddenly lay on Han Shuo's chest, crying tears of joy. She stuck out her tongue and first licked Han Shuo's chest. Han Shuo let out a soft groan of comfort and then fiercely bit down with her silver teeth, making Han Shuo scream. Let's see if you dare bully me again, humph. Emily giggled proudly when she saw Han Shuo scream. She put on an act of fiercely glaring at Han Shuo before stopping. Feeling that the distance between them and the original demons was gradually increasing, Han Shuo suddenly straightened his clothes and did the same for Emily. He opened his mouth to say, Let's follow Duke and see what he's up to. When Han Shuo finished speaking, Emily chanted an incantation in a low voice, and the gray aura that had been shrouding the surroundings suddenly disappeared without a trace. Han Shuo then poked his body out from the leaves and hugged Emily. He jumped down from the tree amidst her screams and stood steadily in the shrubbery behind them, not causing any harm to Emily's body. Han Shuo and Emily exchanged some information while using the original demons to follow Duke. Han Shuo also told Emily some of his recent experiences in the dark forest. However, he only picked out the things that could be said and kept the things that needed to be hidden from her. Small fry of the 3 stars, you have to listen to me in the future. Otherwise, I can directly punish you. After learning that Han Shuo was only a low-level Han Shuo, Emily couldn't help but laugh and tease Han Shuo along the way. One of the 3 heavyweights of the dark world, Candide, was the highest level of the 5-day emissary. Emily, who was already a 3rd-day emissary, must also have a very high status within the Dark Mantle. No wonder she had the authority to obtain so much information. Who would have thought that you were a 3rd-day emissary? Heh. So what if you are a 3rd-day emissary? You're still moaning under my crotch. If I want you to live, you'll live. If I want you to die, you'll die. Han Shuo laughed proudly as he slapped Emily's round bottom. Boorish and annoying bad boy. I'll make you obedient sooner or later. Emily held onto Han Shuo's arm and pinched Han Shuo in response. She wasn't angry at Han Shuo's boorishness. His body suddenly froze. Through the observation of the original demons, Han Shuo discovered that Duke and Eric had actually found traces of the Cemetery of Death. Duke furrowed his brow as he continuously wandered around the area around the Cemetery of Death. It looked like he discovered something. Emily, who'd stopped along with Han Shuo, looked at Han Shuo in astonishment. She opened her mouth and asked, "What's wrong with you now? You won't blame me for saying that I want to tame you, right? You know that I'm just joking with you." Shaking his head, Han Shuo said lowly, "Should we kill Duke and Eric?" "Not for the time being. If my guesses are correct, that old fox Candide must have wanted to figure out Duke's intentions before letting him live. I have to say, you Dark Mantle people are indeed extraordinarily resourceful to be able to discover us even though we're already in the dark forest." Duke laughed lightly and then started chanting a magic incantation. A strong wind suddenly blew in front of the Dark Mantle member who was trying to leave, hindering his forward speed. The strong winds formed wind blades and crisscrossed in the air as they shot towards the Dark Mantle member. After his body was obstructed, a dagger appeared in his hand. First, he agilely rolled in the shrubbery, dodging most of the wind blades at the front. Then, he waved the dagger to block the other wind blades. A series of clanging sounds rang out. Although his dagger had blocked a few wind blades, 2 deep bloody gashes had appeared on his legs. Not good. The location of the thief who was spying on them seems to have been exposed. Let's hurry over. You deal with Duke. I'll deal with Senior Swordsman Eric. Han Shuo was afraid that the Cemetery of Death would be exposed and wanted to borrow Emily's strength to thoroughly kill Duke and Eric in one fell swoop. Therefore, he immediately cried out in alarm when he saw this situation unfold. Emily's expression changed when she heard Han Shuo's words. A set of gray clothes suddenly appeared and wrapped around her entire body in an instant. She also used the levitation spell to hover in the air and said, "Be careful," to Han Shuo before taking the lead to fly out. Apart from serving in the dark underworld, many of the Dark Mantle members had other identities. Therefore, unless absolutely necessary, they wouldn't easily reveal their true identities to others. This was the basic practice of Dark Mantle members. After Emily left, Han Shuo also took out a set of gray clothes to cover his entire body. 2 of the original demons flew towards Duke, while the other kept a close eye on Eric. Han Shuo was very familiar with this area and quickly ran over from another path, planning to intercept Eric midway and kill him first. By now, Han Shuo's injuries had more or less healed. After experiencing the demonization last time, Han Shuo's magical yuan had actually increased by a large margin. Now that the magical yuan was circulating, Han Shuo had a completely carefree feeling. When Eric heard Duke's voice, he hefted his longsword and flew quickly while being cautious and vigilant. When he reached a small, uneven slope, Han Shuo suddenly chanted a magic incantation. A bone spear suddenly formed and pierced towards Eric. The crossbow fired as soon as the bone spear appeared. After the crossbow fired, Han Shua's body also shot out like lightning. When Duke saw the two attacks coming at him, he actually completely disregarded his image in his panic and used the most practical, but extremely ugly, method of rolling like a donkey. He didn't care about his image at all as he rolled forward. This ugly method was very useful as he actually managed to dodge Han Shua's 2 waves of attacks. After that, Eric appeared directly in front of Han Shua and stabbed out with a sword full of dark green fighting aura. Han Shua hastily brought out the Demon's Lair edge, but his arm was shaken slightly from the impact. Eric also gave a muffled groan and didn't continue to attack Han Shua. He stood up and immediately chased in Duke's direction. Snorting lightly, Han Shua raised the Demon's Lair edge and quickly followed. The other original demon observing Duke discovered that Emily had already started fighting with Duke. It looked like Emily had the upper hand, but it was a pity that Emily seemed to have arrived a step too late. The Dark Mantle Thief's body was now crisscrossed with cuts, and it looked like he was already dead. "Mr. Duke, I'm here," Eric shouted loudly and rushed over with his sword. Duke's expression shook as he was fighting with Emily. However, when he saw Han Shua behind Eric, he suddenly waved the staff in his hand and released a hurricane spell, lifting Han Shua's running body into the air and flinging him into the distance. At this moment, the Eye of Darkness that Han Shua had stored away in his space ring actually flew out of the space ring on its own accord. It shot out a sparkling green light and opened up the boundary protecting the Cemetery of Death. Han Shua's body also crashed into the Cemetery of Death. Oh my God! The Cemetery of Death has actually appeared. Duke had been preparing to turn around and deal with Emily when he saw the green light shoot out in the air and reveal the strange scene of the Cemetery of Death. He immediately cried out in ecstasy and suddenly charged in without regard for anything else. On the other side, Eric and Emily were also inexplicably shocked. They first stared blankly, then simultaneously charged in with all their might before the boundary of the Cemetery of Death closed. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.